So thank you, Alan, for joining us on the Wisdom Podcast.
My pleasure.
We're honoured to have you back on for a second time.
Especially in such hallowed ground.
Yes, and we got a nice fire going. So I think this time we have a lot of students, Wisdom Academy students, doing your online course on Shamatha.
Yeah.
So I was thinking we could focus on Shamatha this time.
I think it's a good idea.
And I got a heap of questions from the audience.
Okay.
So I'll try and weave these into our conversation.
Very good.
But I thought we'd start with the term Shamatha. So what does Shamatha mean? And in particular, what qualifies as actual Shamatha?
Very good. Shamatha being the Sanskrit term, samatha in the Pali. They both have the same meaning, and literally it means quiescence, tranquility, serenity, calm presence, calm abiding. All of these are perfectly good translations. But that's just the etymology of it, the literal meaning of it. But the actual meaning of the term, as opposed to the mere etymology, is that the imbalances of attention are calm. So it's not simply being calm. You could take an overdose of Valium and be calm, or you could have a lot of jet lag. I know a lot about that. It's very calm, but it's not very useful. And so we have these two imbalances of attention, and we're both familiar with both of them. And one is agitation, distraction, the excitation of the mind. That is calmed, and that's part of the meaning of shamatha. But the other aspect is attention deficit, the laxity, the dullness, the torpor of attention. That too is calmed, and what's left is a mind, a flow of attention that is stable and clear, and that's shamatha. Now, the actual achievement of shamatha, I will refer to this later in the talk, especially when we speak in the context of Tibetan Buddhism. They speak not only of practicing shamatha, which refers to a wide array of methods for developing attention and metacognitive skills, but they also speak of actually achieving shamatha. And this is the achievement of a very specific state of samadhi. Technically speaking, it's called access to the first jhana, so I will discuss this a bit later on. But the essence of it, very, very clearly highlighted by Tsongkhapa in particular, but many other great scholars and contemplatives, is the mind has now become serviceable. It's pliant, it's buoyant. It can be used for any task at hand and used extremely efficiently, all right? And so whether you are very intent on cultivating the four immeasurables of loving kindness, compassion, and so forth, you're focused on vipassana, you focus on the cultivation of all the six perfections, whatever you may be focused on, bringing to the task at hand, in the context of Buddhism, these various types of meditation or spiritual practice, the shamatha gives you a mind that is extremely serviceable, efficient, light, buoyant, clear, and stable.
Very nice. So you mentioned another word, samadhi. So that's another Sanskrit word that's very, popular in the West.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you could relate samadhi and shamatha, these two Sanskrit words, and in particular, what qualifies shamatha rather than just ordinary samadhi? So what's the relationship between samadhi and shamatha?
The term samadhi within the Buddhist context, because it has different meanings in Hinduism and different schools of Hinduism, but in the Buddhist context, it's used especially in two ways. One is a very narrow, focused kind of definition of it. It simply means single-pointed attention or single-pointed mind. That's very straightforward. But when we bring this into the broader context of the three higher trainings that constitute the very kind of the structure of the path to liberation, of ethics, the higher training in ethics, higher training in samadhi, higher training in wisdom. In this context, samadhi means more than simply being highly concentrated or very focused. It's referring rather to a much broader agenda or endeavor of bringing about exceptional degrees of mental balance. And so the term itself, I like etymology, they give you some flavor of what the term is about. Samadhi comes from sam, and the Sanskrit verbal root da, which means to place. So sam means totally, is an intensifier, like really, and da means to place. So it's totally, really placing the mind. So whatever you're attending to, you're doing so with a unified mind. So samadhi means a unification, a coalescence, a composure of the attention. It's just the opposite of multitasking, and the opposite of distraction and agitation and so forth. And so it is being able to give one's whole attention to the task at hand, and then the samma samadhi in Pali, or samyak samadhi, I translate it as authentic samadhi, And this means that you're not just focused, like a sniper could be focused, to kill somebody. One can be focused on cheating people in the stock market. And so you can be focused for many things, including video games and sports and so forth. But samyak samadhi, authentic samadhi, is a very focused mind that is authentic in the sense that the way one is focusing one's mind is in tune with reality. It's an authentic, it is leading you to an ever-deepening sense of genuine well-being that's rooted in knowing reality as it is, as opposed to simply getting some titillation or entertainment from reality.
So would it be fair to say that shamatha is a type of samadhi, but all samadhis aren't shamatha?
Well, there must be different opinions here, so I'll simply express mine, with no intimation that it's the right one, or the only right one. But when I think of shamatha, and I've been studying and practicing it for some decades now, what first comes to mind is an array of techniques, of methods. And in the Pali Canon, the Buddha taught, 40 different techniques. We find other techniques in the Mahayana tradition, and yet further techniques for refining the attention, focusing especially on the cultivation and refinement of mindfulness and introspection, which I'll come back to later. So one finds literally dozens upon dozens of different methods, but they all have in common, this is about refining one's attention so that it can be used very effectively, efficiently, in the most meaningful of pursuits. And so the actual achievement of shamatha then is very specifically, now technically speaking, it is the achievement of access or the threshold to the first jhana. And I can go to that now or in my talk as you wish, but it's very specific. And there actually has been a lot of confusion in the popular press about jhanas and entering them, getting out of them, and so forth, by people who I think are more satisfied with sound bites than really detailed, careful, meticulous scholarship. It's not that hard, but you have to be interested. And if you're not interested, then you can be satisfied with sound bites. And some people suggesting you can achieve the first jhana or more in a weekend. Well, I guess if you're an Albert Einstein of samadhi, you probably could. I won't count anything out in principle. But overall, that's a wild exaggeration and terribly misleading.
So in that case, when you're talking about shamatha and related to access concentration, the fact that the shamatha is related with pliancy is key here. So not all samadhis have pliancy.
No, again, samadhi in the broader sense, the cultivation of the four immeasurables, of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. These all fit in that higher training of samadhi, right? Cultivating what I call a spirit of emergence, often called renunciation, becoming completely disillusioned with thinking, I'm really going to find satisfaction, fulfillment, and enduring sense of well-being by looking outwards and massaging the world around me and the people around me, getting them all into shape so that I'll just go from one happy situation to another. Good luck with that, especially if you're my age. When you're young, you might be hopeful, but you get older and kind of like hope, it fades because your body is, not what it used to be. And so we can look outwards, but the whole emphasis of shamatha, generally meditation in general in Buddhism, is looking inwards and seeking an enduring sense of well-being by an inner transformation and purification. And shamatha is integral to that.
Okay. So we've got samadhi, we've got shamatha. You've been talking about jhana or dhyana in Sanskrit. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship between shamatha and jhana.
Sure. And so, again, I'd like to go to the gold standard because I have looked fairly carefully in the Pali literature, the Theravada commentaries, for which I have tremendous respect. Also looked in the Mahayana literature on the jhanas and shamatha, the access and so forth. And I did my doctoral dissertation on this. So I was familiar with it, drenched my mind in it academically for a number of years at Stanford. And I don't see any significant differences. That is, differences in fundamental view or evaluation. What is the first jhana, the second, the third, fourth, all within the form realm. Or then beyond that, there are the samapitis, the absorptions in the formless realm. I've read the literature, and I find a tremendous complementarity in some places. They don't say exactly the same thing, but a congruity, a harmony. So I just don't see any grounds for any interesting debate, but rather learning from. So I have learned a great deal from my very esteemed Theravada friends, Bhikkhu Bodhi, Analayo Bhikkhu, and others who have such knowledge of this tradition, far more than myself. I learn from them. And so simply put, there's a gold standard here for which I don't see any serious debate. And that is when you've fully achieved the first jhana, the whole locus of your awareness has moved from this familiar world here that we call the desire realm, the kamadhatu in Buddhism. It's our familiar world where there's so many things out there that we tend to desire or desire to be free of, right? Looking outwardsly. So we're dwelling in a realm of existence, a dimension of existence, where happiness seems to be out there, and we scurry around in motion, looking for places, situations, people, jobs, automobiles, and so forth that will give us happiness. When you cross the threshold from the desire realm into the form realm, that point of transition, crossing the threshold, is exactly the point at which you fully achieve shamatha. But then when you not only are on the threshold, it's like being at the doormat of a house,
Yeah.
and with one foot inside the house. Are you in the house? Yes. Are you fully in the house? Well, no, but you have crossed the threshold, right? That's the achievement of shamatha. Now, you may enter fully into the house where your awareness is fully absorbed in this first jhana, and there are multiple mansions, so to speak, or dimensions within this form realm, which is another dimension of reality. It's more Platonic in nature, a realm of pure ideas, pure forms. And so Buddhaghosa, who I think it's safe to say is the most authoritative commentator in the entire Theravada tradition, he is the gold standard. We don't have to agree with everything he says, but his authority is spanning for 1,500 years by now. And I have tremendous respect for his writings. It's just absolutely brilliant. He says, when you have fully, I'm paraphrasing here, but I have the direct quote in my notes. He says, when you fully achieve the first jhana, then one who has achieved that can remain in samadhi in a stretch, in a flow of samadhi, flawless. No excitation, no laxity, no hyperactivity, no deficit, just a flow, effortless flow of samadhi for 24 hours straight. And he said it's like a strong man who can remain standing for 24 hours at a stretch. Now, that's very plain English. Yeah. That is the gold standard. Now, right next to that gold standard for the full achievement of the first jhana is access to, or the threshold to the first jhana. That, as I've mentioned before, is what we equate with shamatha in all schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And of course, that's rooted in Indian Mahayana Buddhism. And here, once again, there's just no debate that I've ever heard. If you've achieved not the full jhana, but access to the first jhana, you can remain in that same flow of awareness where the entire current of your awareness is withdrawn from all the five physical senses. It's all drawn into purely mental. You're able to remain in that flow, just impeccable, continuous, free of excitation, free of all five hindrances or five obscurations, which I'll go into later perhaps, for 4 hours minimum.
4 hours.
4 hours. So not as stable as the full achievement, but in both cases you're equally free of these five obscurations.
Buddhaghosa describes it as a toddler walking butt. So do we agree with that?
Well, the toddler, that's a related point and very interesting one. Because you achieve, now we're going into some real nitty-gritty areas. Well, I adore this material.
We're at Harvard, we can geek out a little bit.
I've been practicing teaching it for 40 years now, and I just kind of like, I feel like a school kid. I love it so much. It's so interesting. So, you know, you can't fake this. I mean, I just love this material. So the toddler, let's go to the toddler. So he tells with great precision what's it like, for example, by way of mindfulness breathing, which is the most commonly practiced shamatha method in the Theravada tradition. He tells when the so-called counterpart sign arises. You've crossed the threshold because the origin of this counterpart sign, I won't go into it right now for the sake of brevity, emerges from the form realm. It's not something conjured up by your mind and
so
the
nimitta realm. Is from the form realm.
The counterpart nimitta is emerging from the form realm, but he said it's 100 and 1,000 times more subtle than the so-called acquired sign, which is a product of your mind in the desire realm. It's so subtle that you encounter it, but it's so subtle, it's very, very difficult to sustain that engagement with this extremely subtle sign, which a person in the desire realm can't even imagine it. You can use words, but you can't really nail it. And so this is the toddler, that you have achieved access to the first jhana. You've now, in our terminology, you've achieved shamatha. You've accessed that counterpart sign. You've crossed the threshold into the form realm. But it's so subtle that he says it's like a little toddler who gets up on his wobbly little legs and then falls back on his bum. And what he's referring to here is you are having a direct encounter, like am I looking at your face, a direct encounter with this counterpart sign, but it's so elusive, so subtle, that you can't hold it. And you fall back into what he calls the bhavanga. And I translate the bhavanga as ground of becoming. Bhava means to become. Anga has various meanings, but one of them is basis or foundation. So I think ground of becoming is, I think, quite an illuminating translation. And this is where you just settle back into, you've not become dull. You should have gotten rid of that a long time ago. That's one of the 5 hindrances.
Yeah.
You've not become dull, but you no longer have a clear target or object of your attention. So you slip back into this mode of awareness that has no clear referent, but it's bright, it's clear, it's sharp and discerning, but no object. So it is like, in fact, you slip into this bhavanga when you go into dreamless sleep, very deep dreamless sleep, stage 4 non-REM sleep. You slip into that, but unless you're lucid, you slip into it and your awareness is obscured by the dullness of deep sleep, so you don't even know you're deep asleep. But you're accessing the same dimension of consciousness. When you go into deep dreamless sleep, when you faint, you'll go comatose, and in the last moment of the dying process, you slip into that dimension. The difference is that most people, when we slip into deep dreamless sleep, we have no explicit awareness of anything, including the most obvious reality that we're deep asleep. Likewise, when you have general anesthesia, you faint, you go comatose, or in the final moment in the dying process, where you slip into, in Tibetan Buddhist terminology, the dark near attainment, you've just slipped into that dimension of consciousness. And most people, when they get there, they blank out. They blank out, like getting hit on the head and just passing out. But the key of the shamatha is you access that same dimension of consciousness, but you do so clearly, luminously, discerningly. You are lucid in that state. So it's analogous to being in lucid, dreamless sleep. But if you just are in a lucid dream, I don't want to go on too long here, but if you're in a lucid dream, and then you simply release the dream implodes, but you maintain lucidity, then you will go from a lucid dreaming state to a lucid dreamless state. This is like entering into the bhavanga with a 40-watt bulb. If you access that same bhavanga after probably thousands of hours of training, we're not talking a weekend here, we're not talking about a 1-month retreat, we're talking about a retreat, full-time practice, absolutely dedicated practice to cultivating the attention skills, achieving shamatha, which will be a matter of months almost certainly. It could be years. But when you achieve it, then you're accessing that same dimension of consciousness, but with a 1,000-watt bulb. And so your awareness is radiantly clear, but when you're resting in the bhavanga, it's radiantly clear of nothing much.
Are you equating Vibhanga with black near attainment before clear light, or Kunchinamshi, or?
Based on a lot of research, I have now come to a very strong conviction, which means I'm wrong. I'm flamboyantly wrong. I mean, emphatically, grandstandingly wrong. That what the Gelupas call the subtle continuum of mental consciousness, which is what you slip into when you achieve shamatha, and what carries over from one lifetime to the next. In the Theravada tradition, they call it Vivanga, the ground of becoming. And in the Chittamatra, but I'm going to focus more on Dzogchen. Dzogchen I totally embrace, and Chittamatra I have a lot of appreciation for, but I'm not a Chittamatran. In the Dzogchen tradition, when they use the term alaya vijnana, or kunchinamshe, I am now absolutely persuaded, and I can give you a lot of reasons, but probably not so interesting right now, that they're referring to exactly the same thing. A tiny indication of this, and that is when we look at the teachings of Jujum Lingpa, then when he describes it with tremendous clarity, like in the Vajra Essence, the process of achieving shamatha, where your mind, your psyche, my psyche, dissolves into this substrate consciousness. He says this occurs on the culmination of achieving shamatha, right? It occurs when you die, it occurs when you faint, it occurs in deep sleep, and lo and behold, in the Theravada tradition, they say, here's the bhavanga. It's a brightly shining mind. The Buddha referred to it as pabhasa chitta, brightly shining mind, which is actually a mind of clear light. And he said it's always luminous, but is adventitiously obscured by the 5 obscurations or 5 hindrances, but it's always there, it's always pure, always luminous, and it manifests, or you experience it in deep sleep, when you faint, and when you die. So by context, it's the end of the line when you achieve shamatha, access to the first jhana, when you're simply resting in the bhavanga. Now resting there, then you've got all kinds of options. One is to say, well, this is all very nice to achieve access to the first jhana, but I want to fully achieve the first jhana, in which you fortified the 5 jhana factors. They're stronger in full achievement of the first jhana as opposed to access. but in both cases you're equally free of the 5 hindrances or 5 obscurations. So you may then retrieve that counterpart sign and basically achieve shamatha all over again on this very, very subtle sign that emerges from the form realm. That's a possibility. And then from there you can go to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th jhana, and if you wish you can carry on into the samapatis. But especially in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, there's a very strong emphasis in all schools of Tibetan Buddhism that shamatha is indispensable for really proceeding along the path, whether it's Vajrayana, whether it's Mahayana, whether it's Mahamudra, Dzogchen, whatever it may be. If you want to really proceed along the path and come to its culmination, shamatha is utterly inadequate in and of itself. You're not even on the path, but it is utterly indispensable in conjunction with vipassana.
Yeah.
And so in this regard then, it is indispensable.
Necessary but not sufficient.
Necessary but not sufficient. And so, again, different terminology, but I have now I could spend an hour telling all the reasons why I'm equating experientially subtle continuum mental consciousness. So we have coarse mind, what we're experiencing on that's what psychologists study on the whole, and it includes the conscious mind and unconscious. They're both there, because they're human. The substrate consciousness, aka bhavanga, aka subtle continuum mental consciousness, is not human. It's more like a stem consciousness that can become a neuron or a bone marrow cell or a blood cell, but it's not yet configured because it's not yet embodied and influenced by a nervous system and so on. Right? And so, in this regard, this is a key to really fathoming the primal nature of consciousness itself and the origins of the human mind. Because, I'll say from a Buddhist perspective, but with a tremendous amount of confidence, consciousness doesn't emerge from chemicals, including the chemicals and electricity in the brain. Frankly, it's a crazy idea. But if you've been fixating on the physical for 400 years, and that's all you really know about, and then finally you get around to studying the mind, you'll feel you have no option other than to think, well, it must emerge from the physical, because what else would it emerge from? So, I think this is tremendously relevant in our modern era where the study of the mind is so sophisticated and has unveiled so many truths, important truths, about the nature of mind, cognition, emotions, mental imbalances, and developmental psychology. There is so much there. Great, great bounties of insight, discoveries made over the last century or so. But when it comes to the mind-body problem, how does the mind influence the body influence the mind? There's been no progress at all, in fact. What are the origins of the mind? What's the nature of consciousness? What's the role of the mind in nature? And if we slip over into physics, quantum mechanics in particular, the measurement problem. What's the role of the observer in making a quantum measurement? That's a 90-year-old problem for which there has been no progress whatsoever. So I see these two issues, the mind-body problem, just for heaven's sakes, what is the nature of the mind? How does it impact the body? How does the brain influence the mind? Because they're correlated, but the nature of the correlation, any really honest, open-minded psychologist or neuroscientist will say, we don't know the nature of the correlation. In fact, we don't know any more now than we did 100 years ago. And any good quantum physicist would say, we have not solved the measurement problem. In fact, we're no closer to a solution now than we were 90 years ago. My hypothesis here, and it's a very empirically testable hypothesis, is that there is in fact a common ground why no progress has been made in the mind-body problem or the measurement problem. And that is, we in the modern world, Eurocentric civilization, which now has become global, we have no rigorous means for directly observing and exploring the mind, states of consciousness, unlike every other branch of the natural sciences. They all carefully observe the phenomena they're seeking to understand. That's the hallmark of Galileo, the hallmark of Darwin, the hallmark of William James, but he got snuffed out in these hallowed grounds where he taught. But he got snuffed out by people like B.F. Skinner. That never mind first-person experience. It's misleading at best and non-existent at worst. So who cares? Let's get back to what we can measure, and that's behavior and brain. Well, if you want to know about behavior and brain, this is a very good strategy. If you want to know about mind, you might want to actually look at it. And shamatha is the telescope for the mind. Because all of your subjective experience, the whole bandwidth, from pain in your knee to the most subtle mental processes and states of consciousness, all of these are physically undetectable. There is no technology that can directly measure any subjective mental state of any kind. Even the presence of consciousness. Do insect-eating plants, are they conscious? Do they go yum-yum when they eat a fly? Or is it purely a chemical reaction, just, stimulus and response, but with no experience whatsoever? When does, I mean, this gets real very quickly. I'm going to assume that the human sperm is not conscious. Otherwise, every time a man ejaculates, you're a mass murderer. So it's not a happy thought. And the women are not much better. If the egg is conscious, then a woman kills a sentient being every month. That's not nice, but I also think it's not true. So let's assume, maybe it's a good working hypothesis, pretty safe, the egg is not a conscious sentient being. The sperm, they're not conscious sentient beings. They come together, and at some point, and I won't pretend to know when, but from the point of the fertilization of the egg, from that point until the baby is born, something fresh happens in the mother's womb. There's a passenger, and it has its own perspective. It is conscious, and where did that consciousness come from? Did it come from the egg, the sperm, the union? Did it come from God, from angels? Where did it come from? And the Buddhist view is completely naturalistic. It's not calling upon some transcendent divine agency of God infusing the souls, like Descartes believed, nor is it materialistic, advocating the notion that the founder of modern scientific materialism, Thomas H. Huxley, the great biologist, Darwin's bulldog, he said the notion that you can stimulate, I'll put it in modern terminology, that you can stimulate neurons and that thoughts and images and subjective experiences will pop out. He said, this is like believing that if you rub a lamp, a genie will come. It's magical thinking. It's not science. It's ridiculous thinking. And he's a materialist, a pretty hardcore materialist. And so it is a fanciful notion that we've all got accustomed to. And we keep on saying it, and it doesn't sound so stupid anymore. But it doesn't make it less stupid. It to make it commonly stupid. I'm too old to be anything other than blunt. Sorry.
So, Alan, I don't know where to go next. It's always talking with you. There's like 1,000 leads I'd like to chase. From like the Vibhanga, I'm wondering whether if you equate it with Kunshi Namshi, are you differentiating Shi and Rigpa and Uso from that? But we won't go there. Maybe I should stick to the people's questions.
That's good.
So we've got a lot of people also who recently did Mahasi Sayadaw's Wisdom Academy course.
Yes, good.
And in that they learnt that Shamatha. So we got Samadhi, right?
Yep.
We got Shamatha.
Yep.
And Shamatha, we're going to talk about Shamatha as associated with pliancy and therefore equivalent to access concentration.
Yes.
And then we got jhana. And access concentration or Shamatha is like the doorway into the jhana.
Yeah, it's the entry to the jhana. It's exactly right.
Okay, so then, and then also you're saying in your course, Shamatha is indispensable.
If you want to,
for liberation.
If you want to reach the path, marga.
Marga, yeah.
And so Kiminda Thera, who's passed away but a very, very fine Theravada scholar, has raised this issue of momentary samadhi, whether it's sufficient or whether you actually need the first jhana to become a stream enterer, to achieve marga, the Arya marga, and to proceed on that path to once return and non-return and become an arhat. And he makes a very strong case with just straight scholarship, very pure, very, very well-informed scholarship, that if you want to reach marga, and what we're talking about here, the whole notion of marga, whether Mahayana, Sravakayana, Pratyeka Buddha, whatever, is an evolutionary process that's irreversible. You know, you can take drugs and you can have a really fantastic experience, and then they taper off, and it becomes a memory. You can win the lottery and have a big spike of happiness, but then they know that dips really quickly. You can practice meditation for a lifetime and achieving nothing that is irreversible. Keep on having recurrent problems that you had 30, 40, 50 years ago, and the reason for that is you've not reached marga, path. And so Kiminda Thera makes a very strong case that if you wish to reach the Arya Marga, which is the first point at which you now have achieved something irreversible, you must have the union of samatha and vipassana. They have to be integrated, fully integrated, and focusing on the fundamental characteristic of reality. Impermanence, dukkha, and not self. And that's what brings about irreversible transformation. Now, it's just begun when you enter the path, but it continues until, and this is very important because this has been smudged over by people who, modern people get impatient and want to think they're arhats before they are. That to be an arhat, there is only one interpretation that is valid, and that is you are forever and irreversibly free of all mental afflictions. If you're not forever and completely free of all mental afflictions, you can call yourself what you like, but you're not an arhat. Not Shravaka, Pratyeka Buddha, you're not an Arya, you're not. And so in order to bring that irreversible transformation, that you never fall back, you'll never become sub-stream enterer. You're stream enterer from now on until you go further beyond that, but you'll never be less than a stream enterer. right? And if we look at the Mahayana paths, now it's unpacked into 5 paths, path of accumulation and so forth, to fully achieve, to enter into that first Mahayana path of accumulation, small, medium, and great stage. There's some debate about it. It tends to be very scholarly debate. But I'm convinced, based on the teachings I've received, the texts that I've studied, that, and we're following Mahayana now.
Yeah.
So the question of to become a bodhisattva, not to simply cultivate bodhicitta and it arises and passes away, but to become a bodhisattva, the hallmark of that, for which I think there's no debate really, is that this current of bodhicitta, the spirit of awakening, the bodhisattva's aspiration, arises spontaneously, effortlessly, and for that to arise in such a way, it's called uncontrived. So it becomes really your core, like your North Star, your core opus mandara, operating system, what have you. That must be backed with shamatha.
Oh, so you're saying shamatha, bodhicitta, real, genuine bodhicitta requires shamatha
Irreversible bodhicitta, which means you've achieved the small stage of the Mahayana path accumulation. This is technical talk. But, many of us who've been practicing, cultivating bodhicitta, some semblance of it at least arises, and then we get petty, or we fall back into self-centeredness, or we get irritable and grumpy and kind of elbow our way through humanity, poking people in the eyeball, and bodhicitta, and then we kind of restore it again. But for it to become your baseline,
main mind,
your main mind, then to mind me just conceptually, imagine that your mind is still heavily subject to the 5 obscurations. Let's run through them quickly. The 5 obscurations mean, first of all, hedonic fixation. It's not just sensual, but it's fame, it's wealth, it's notoriety, it's sensual, it's all that kind of stuff, and thinking that's going to make me happy. That's the first of the obscurations. Insofar as you're focused there, you're not going to discover the inner nature of your own mind. The second one is ill will, malevolence, malice, enmity. That's going to block you. The third one is laxity and dullness. They're going to shroud you. The fourth one is excitation and anxiety. They're going to bump you all over the place. And the fifth one is an interesting one, is afflictive uncertainty. Waffling, wavering, not be able to get totally your act together and carry through. Well, consider that insofar as your mind is still prone to those, that's going to be a very poor, faulty, defective vehicle for bodhicitta. It's going to keep on undermining. Ill will is going to torpedo bodhicitta. And the other ones will as well. So the Buddha said, and I can quote him here pretty close, he said, for a person whose mind is still dominated by or conditioned by the 5 obscurations, such a person is, see if I can get it right, is in debt. Like this is debt you can't pay off, like debtor's prison kind of debt. You're in debt, you're sick, you're in bondage, like chains, you're enslaved, and you're lost in a desert track. Now those are his metaphors. Add those up, put those into your imagination and see what that would feel like. You've got debt you'll never pay off, you're sick, you're in handcuffs and leg irons, and you're enslaved, and somebody's just dropped you in the middle of the Sahara. Have a nice day. That is, you're one sick cookie. And to think that you can have a mind like that, and oh, by the way, you're a bodhisattva too. And bodhicitta is just arising, streaming. It is your mind. That just doesn't make any sense to me. You have to have a superbly healthy mind. The Buddha has just raised the bar on what is mental health. And a person who is truly mentally healthy is a person who has achieved shamatha. And the rest of us, not quite there yet.
So the Theravada tradition is diverse in itself, right?
Sure.
So you have Mahasi Sayadaw system, you have these Vipassana movement, and so what you're basically saying is basically to achieve like liberation or arhat, where there's the permanent, where mental afflictions are permanently eradicated from your experience, you definitely need shamatha.
I just don't think there's any reasonable doubt of that. Some very erudite people like Mahasi Sayadaw have made a case that momentary samadhi is sufficient, but as he acknowledges, at least implicitly,
he does.
and Kamintara really focuses on this, number one, the Buddha never even mentioned momentary samadhi. So if you want to stage a platform saying the Buddha said momentary samadhi, never mind any of the jhanas, that this is sufficient, you have no basis at all for that statement in the Buddha's own teachings. If it were that easy, if you don't even need to achieve shamatha, or the first jhana, the second, and so forth, if it's that easy, then why wouldn't the Buddha mention it, for heaven's sakes? If all you need is momentary samadhi, you just focus on vipassana. Wouldn't he mention that? He didn't. Now, who did is the great commentator, Buddhaghosa, but where he places his references to momentary samadhi are deep in the terrain, much further along the path after you've achieved the jhanas.
Yeah, purification of mind, right?
Purification of mind. It's in the vipassana territory. So to decontextualize that, to pluck that out of the third of the three phases, ethics, samadhi, and wisdom, to pluck it out of the wisdom, which is already based upon very deep foundation in ethics, very deep cultivation of the jhanas, to pluck it out of the wisdom and then say, well, never mind all that goes before it, that momentary samadhi, well, theoretically it doesn't make any sense, but really I'm an empiricist. And if we can point to people in this modern era that have followed that tradition, and we should bring some scientists in, because these mental afflictions are not that difficult to identify. You know, anger, resentment, hostility, craving, greed, ignorance, reification of self, and so forth. I would listen. If you can find some people who've been following this Mahasi Sayadaw approach for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and they have achieved irreversible freedom, and they can demonstrate that, I will listen. But one very noted Vipassana teacher, and I want to keep this person anonymous, wrote years ago that he'd been following this Mahasi Sayadaw tradition for like 40 years, and he said, neither I nor anybody else I know among Theravada practitioners, and I think he mentioned Zen as well, none of us have achieved irreversible freedom. So then you've got a choice to make. You can either say, well, shucks, the Buddha didn't really mean that. He just means you've got real good management, that you're no longer dominated by your mental afflictions, but you're still living in the neighborhood. That's one slick way out. Or you can say, maybe we're missing something. Oh, gee, could it be shamatha? Because almost the defining characteristic, a true mark of the Buddha's innovation in Indian contemplative culture, which I think was without precedent, in a tremendously rich culture, where they had already fathomed all the jhanas, the samapatis, they knew that upside and downside. They had already explored all of that territory. The Buddha came into an already extremely mature contemplative culture. Probably a reason he chose India rather than, who knows, someplace else, like North America. I don't know. But the union of Shamatha Vipassana, I think that's unprecedented. The union of Shamatha Vipassana, and the Buddha having experienced all of the jhanas and the samapatis right off the bat with his two teachers, very shortly after he left his home, and finding this did not bring about any irreversible transformation. And then setting off on 6 years of asceticism, and then re-achieving, he tells about this, after his 6 years, re-achieving the first jhana. The question came up when he recalled having spontaneously achieved the first jhana when he was a youth. Just got it spontaneously. Then he lost it, got caught up in the affairs of being a prince, achieved all these higher states, but then lost them when he went into an asceticism. It really ruins the body. And then he thought, I mean, I try to imagining what the situation he's in. He's left his wife, he's left his family, he's left a very comfortable home. He's just had 6 years that gave him nothing except for ruined health. And he pretty much tried everything. Asceticism and fasting and breathing exercises and so forth. And he came out of all of that after he restored his health with the help of a young lady who gave him some curd, some yogurt, and rice. Then he said, he recalled his earlier spontaneous achievement of the first jhana, characterized by all of the 5 jhana factors, and removed from all sensual desires. And the question arose in his mind, might that be the way to liberation? And the answer intuitively came back, yes. Within a relatively short time, he re-achieved the first jhana, went to the base of the Bodhi tree, sat down with the resolve not to move until he achieved enlightenment. And with that platform, the first jhana, fused that with Vipassana, and the rest is history. So I think in the Buddha's own words, the enormously important role of at least the first jhana. If you get more, that's gravy. But the first jhana, that's not gravy. This is like, again, it's like a telescope for astronomy. Until you have the telescope, you're sky gazing, you're maybe practicing astrology, you're enjoying the stars. But you're not an astronomer until you've developed the appropriate technology for carefully observing with sophistication, rigor, and precision the phenomena you're seeking to understand.
So the Theravadan traditions that do use jhana, so like Pa Auk Sayadaw, these traditions, so you have Westerners going on these retreats, right? And serious students.
Yes, oh yeah, I know some.
And then coming back and reporting, going through all the 8 jhanas. And they're not talking about some light, they're talking about full absorption, no sensory. And so my question is, and then in the Tibetan tradition, we talk about shamatha being so hard to achieve, right?
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if the two traditions are talking about the same thing.
Well, I've had the good fortune to meet with a very fine Theravada Buddhist scholar. He's very, very good. And he's also an experienced meditator, and he spent, I believe, years in training under Pa Sayadaw in Myanmar. And we were at the same university lecturing at the same time, so we had some sit-down time. And he was very candid, very forthcoming. I asked him some question about jhanas, and he was very forthcoming, yes, I've achieved all of them. And then I asked him, then, okay, the 4th jhana. Just as Buddha goes, it's perfectly clear if you've achieved the 1st jhana, 24 hours straight, you're just not moving, you're like a stone Buddha. But you're in impeccable samadhi. You achieve the 4th jhana, and once again, he's perfectly clear that if you've achieved the 4th jhana, number 1, your breathing stops. It doesn't go shallow, it stops. And it remains still for as long as you're in the 4th jhana. There is no fluctuation of the breath at all. So this completely defies everything we know about the respiration, brain, and circulation. It completely violates all of that. So, but then also he says that if you've achieved that 4th jhana, you can go into samadhi for like 2 weeks. And even if a bullock train passes by, I don't know, 100 bulls pulling wagons right next to you, you'll be completely oblivious of them. So I asked this esteemed colleague, because I have a lot of admiration for his integrity, his honesty, his scholarship, and I asked him, did you achieve that? I mean, can you go into samadhi for 2 weeks with no breath? Which should cause severe brain damage. You come out comatose, according to modern brain physiology. And he said, oh, no, that's he had a special term for it. That's the I don't know, manifest achievement of the 4th jhana. Very few people achieve that. But I've achieved the 4th jhana. In other words, they made up a new definition.
We're talking about different things.
Yeah,
to be.
And I've heard a number of people, again, I want to keep it, because I'm not here to criticize people.
I have friends that do
yeah,
that.
but I'm not here to criticize people. But themes, and when I think there's misinformation, that's my job. This is what I've been trained in, to try to highlight what is authentic according to respective traditions. There is no difference here between Theravada and Mahayana. And so I've heard of people training with, very renowned meditation teachers from Asia, such as Burma, and they'll go off and will spend 1 or 2 months and come out claiming to have achieved the 1st and 2nd jhana after a month or 2, and then losing it. Then losing it, well, that just doesn't correspond to anything you find in the authentic teachings. I've asked the Dalai Lama about this in one conference that I think I helped to organize. If you've achieved shamatha, just access to the 1st jhana, let alone full jhana, let alone the 4th jhana, let alone the samapatis in the formless realm, if you achieve little old pipsqueak access to the 1st jhana, I asked His Holiness in one of the Mind and Life meetings, if you've achieved that, what are the likelihood that you can keep it for the rest of your life? And he said, extremely high. Why would you lose it? And so I think there has been a lot of dilution of wanting to, maybe it has a very benevolent motivation behind it, that we don't want to raise the bar so high that people would feel, well, no matter what I do, I can never remain in samadhi for 2 weeks, forget about it. Maybe I'll just go out and play video games. Or, sailing. I've heard sailing is a lot of it. Maybe I can achieve shamatha in sailing. Or art or music, anything else. It can look so intimidating that you can basically discourage people from trying at all. Whereas one teacher saying you can achieve jhana in a weekend, well, oh gosh, I can spare a weekend, or I can spare a month or 2. But I'm not here to advocate a dogma or we're right, they're wrong. It's just that if this is the Theravada tradition we're talking about, and you say you've achieved the 4th jhana, I would say congratulations. Then if you're being so public about it, then publicly sit here for 2 weeks, go into samadhi without breath, and let's see how that turns out for you.
Get the scientists in.
Well, anybody can watch. You can hold it. You need a scientist. Hold a mirror under their nose, for heaven's sakes. And see if they can sit there. Anybody can sit there for 2 weeks without moving and not be dead, And so this is by their own criteria. The 1st jhana, the 4th jhana, by their own criteria. If those who are teaching Theravada are defining the jhanas and so forth in a way that contradicts their most authoritative commentator, Buddha Ghost himself, and many others of that ilk, then it's not Mahayana versus Hinayana, it's not Alan Wallace versus them, It's them versus them. They're sabotaging their own tradition. And I don't agree with that. I have such reverence for their Theravada tradition that I'm always looking for the gold standard. And if it seems out of reach, well then try harder. But don't cheapen it by lowering it down to our level. I find this happens a lot, that people meditate for some time and they desperately want to think they've achieved something, and they look in the Pali Canon and say, that kind of looks like it. Yeah, I think I probably achieved the second jhana now, because I'm single-pointed and I'm feeling a sense of well-being and bliss. And yeah, that pretty much, I think I'm done. I'm there.
Yeah.
You know? We bring it, instead of rising up to the level of the Buddhist teachings in the Pali Canon or the Mahayana, instead of rising up to that level, we bring that level down to where we are.
Yeah.
And then you feel, yeah, I've achieved the first jhana, but then I lost it. And then I found this new girl, and she's fantastic. You know, I mean, we're really hitting it off. I think she's my soulmate. But the jhana was nice while it lasted. You know? And we sabotage the tradition that we say we're taking refuge in.
So I think there's an important point there about the necessity of a teacher, right? Rather than us self-diagnosing.
Yeah, but not just a teacher. I mean, sometimes all too often we find the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
People who don't know themselves, and they're teaching with, I think, often very good motivation and teaching their very best, but frankly, they don't know what they're talking about. Take one more example. Somebody contacted me not long ago. I want to keep it vague because, again, I'm not interested in criticizing people. People change overnight, and I'm criticizing somebody who doesn't exist anymore. Why should I do that? But this person was told by his teacher, who is very renowned, and renowned as being a master of dhyanas and so forth. He's written on it. He's very internationally known. This is a close student of his. And his teacher told him, you've achieved the first jhana. That's what he wrote to me. My teacher told me I've achieved the first jhana. But, Alan, I'm experiencing a tremendous amount of lust. Can you help me? Well, my answer is I'm speechless. Because if you've achieved the first jhana, you're free of the 5 obscurations, and that includes sensual craving. That includes lust. You cannot have achieved and not lost the first jhana and be overwhelmed by lust. And his teacher has to know that. I mean, this is not brain science, I can say so. It's not that hard. And so I just, and I didn't feel it was my role to say your teacher's just completely confused and he's misled you fundamentally. I don't feel comfortable doing that. So I just wrote to him, I think you should consult with your teacher because I don't think I can help you. Because, look, this is not hard. If you've achieved first jhana, it's everywhere. Achieve the first jhana, you are temporarily, you have subdued, not eradicated, but profoundly subdued all 5 obscurations, and the first one of them is sensual craving. And now you're saying, I have achieved it, and I'm overwhelmed by sensual craving.
Let's finish with relating Shamatha to Dzogchen.
Oh yeah.
So I've got like 2 parts to the question.
Yep.
And so in the maybe Mahamudra as well, in the Mahamudra Dzogchen tradition, Shamatha is like described as, in 2 ways, like thoughts being pacified into their own base, along with a mind that's stable in bliss, clarity, and non-conceptuality.
Yeah.
Okay. So my first part of the question is, do you think that's the same as the Shamatha with pliancy that we talked about earlier? And so is that necessary for Mahamudra and Dzogchen practice? Second part of the question is, so bliss, clarity, and non-conceptuality, those states, and making a distinction between the base and mind, or Rigpa and Sem and Rigpa. How do we do that? And so what I'm basically asking for you to talk about is the relationship between Shamatha and pointing out or direct introduction.
Oh. And you would like me to do this in how many minutes?
Okay, we can do however you want.
No, it's wonderful. It's a very rich and important question.
Okay. Maybe Alan can repeat.
In brief, simply what's the relationship between Shamatha and the practice of Dzogchen? Achieving Shamatha and identifying pristine awareness. That's the shortened version of the question. And it's a very good question, and I'd like to bring some nuance because it's very easy to be hard-ass. And I don't mind doing that on occasion, but I don't like it as my basic modus operandi. And that is, I've trained under a number of Dzogchen masters, all of whom I respect, because I won't train under them unless I have deep grounds for respect. One of them, and I'll leave him anonymous, but he's a very, very qualified teacher. Spent 9 years of retreat. He's eminent, he's knowledgeable. I received teachings from him. They were fantastic. I even served as interpreter for a short time. And I asked him, as he laid out the whole path, I translated one of his root texts on the whole path, and Shamatha wasn't there. And I asked him, here's your whole path, starting with the preliminaries, going all the way through Tekshu and Tutgyal, the culminating phases of Dzogchen, And where's Shamatha? He said, oh, we don't practice Shamatha as a separate practice. Okay, now I'm not going to write him off. He's too good, right? But I go back to the teachings I received, and my primary Dzogchen Lama is the Venerable Domang Gyatso Rinpoche. And I started training with him in 1990. For about 7 years, I was primary interpreter, translated a number of texts under his guidance. And every text that he taught me, over these 7 years that I was very closely living, I lived with him for 2 years, every text laid out the path, whether it's Natural Liberation, published by Wisdom, lays out the preliminaries, and then Shamatha. Multiple methods culminating in Shamatha without a sign. Then Vipassana, and then the rest of the path. Dream Yoga, Tekshut, Turkyal, and so forth. He taught me Spacious Path of Freedom, the union of the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions, the Mahamudra and Dzogchen. Preliminaries, Shamatha, Vipassana. And then you go into Mahamudra and onto the path, and includes Turkyal from the Dzogchen tradition. And then he taught me Vajra Essence. Very brief reference to the preliminaries, and then really unpacks Shamatha, which we have the book Stilling the Mind, published by, thank you, Wisdom Publication, and then Vipassana, and then the rest of the path, including Stage of Generation Completion. And there were shorter texts, one by Dujun Rinpoche, Shamatha and Vipassana in the Dzogchen tradition, and so forth. And then all of the 5 works of the 5 revealed teachings of Dzogchen by Dujun Lingpa. Mostly 4 out of 5 explicit Shamatha is there. In Buddha Without Meditation, it's there implicitly, but there's so many you've covered that. Because this is all about Vipassana and Tekshut, just those 2 phases. And so, where I want to be very relaxed and open to possibility. Because it's just one Lama. I'm going to keep it anonymous, but I could say his name, and he's a very fine Lama, for which I have no criticism at all. But is it possible, if you're very gifted, and you've done the preliminaries in spades, really purified your mind, cultivated the 4 immeasurables, which is part of the preliminaries in his tradition, really developed deep loving kindness and so forth, and then you receive pointing out instructions with a mind that is very well cultivated, like a field that is mulched, fertilized, tilled, and so forth. It's really ready to be sown. And this qualified Lama gives you pointing out instructions, right? And let's imagine that with this very well cultivated mind, in pristine ethics and beautiful motivation, bodhicitta and so forth, and you receive pointing out instructions. And you actually, the door opens, there's a breaking through conditioned mind to the unconditioned, pristine awareness, primordial consciousness, and you gain a genuine taste, not something conceived of, genuine taste. Is it possible in principle that having cultivated your mind very well and very, very deep Guru Yoga, that is really the deal maker here, very deep Guru Yoga, and probably some stage regeneration and maybe completion practice also, because he teaches that a lot, including the Tsalung practice and so forth. That really gets your whole energy system really tuned well. Imagine you've done all of that, but no Shamatha. But you actually have really done the Tsalung practices, which incredibly tuned your whole prana system. You gain a genuine glimpse of Rigpa. Is it possible that you might slip into that and achieve Shamatha and Vipassana within the context of dwelling in Rigpa? If you're very gifted, yeah. There are people, there are Mozarts, there are Einsteins, there are Gausses, there are people just inconceivably gifted in a wide variety of areas. Magnus, I just watched a documentary on Magnus Carlsen, genius of chess. I mean, he was absolutely brilliant, almost inconceivably brilliant. But he showed his brilliance when he was a kid, the youngest grandmaster in history. And so I'm not one of those people in anything. But there are such people. And not only for chess, mathematics, and science, and music, and art, and so forth, but also in Dharma. And I'm not going to count them out. So could that be that they may never need to practice Shamatha Vipassana separately? Because if you're dwelling in Rigpa, you're viewing reality from the perspective of Rigpa, which means you are seeing all phenomena as empty of inherent nature, not existing from their own side. If you're reified, then you're not viewing reality from Rigpa. So you're seeing, from that vantage point, you're seeing emptiness. The emptiness of inherent nature of every phenomenon you experience, subjectively and objectively, and the very duality of subject-object is also melted away. And so you're realizing emptiness, you're resting in Rigpa, self-knowing Rigpa. Might you achieve Shamatha, stabilize there, and become a Vidyadhara without any separate practice of Shamatha Vipassana? Possible in principle. I think not for the likes of me. This would be like me, 66-year-old, saying, okay, there's Everest. Who needs climbing gear and oxygen? Just go for it. Well, I'm going to die before I'm 1/4 up the mountain. It's not for me. But there are people who've done that, right? Who climbed to the top of Everest with no oxygen. Not me. But there are such individuals. And so similarly, when we go back to the Sutrayana, whether Theravada or whether Mahayana, are there people who are so gifted that they may not do any separate practice of shamatha at all? Go directly for vipassana, whether it's authentic vipassana practice, like as taught in the Satipatthana Sutta by the Buddha, or is it vipassana as taught in the Indian tradition, the Mahayana tradition, or the Tibetan tradition? Is it possible that they, with, again, wonderful preparation, motivation, bodhicitta, all of that, and go directly to vipassana without any separate practice of shamatha, gain some realization of emptiness, of shunyata, ascertain that, and then have emptiness as their object of shamatha, and simultaneously achieve shamatha and vipassana together without any separate practice. I think this does happen, and I think one tradition that does that at its best is Zen. Because shamatha is very de-emphasized, if mentioned at all in Zen. Does this mean it's a flaky, incomplete practice or tradition? I don't believe that. There are too many great masters, Dogen and others. So even if they don't practice shamatha separately, and in the Chan tradition as well, they may or may not. Shamatha is found in the Chan, not so much in Zen, hardly at all. But if you're very gifted, just practicing Soto or Rinzai may give you the realization of emptiness, maybe even realization of Buddha nature, if that's their call. You may achieve shamatha with that as your object. And so this makes it very pliant. But for ordinary people, people of dull faculties, and I'm the first to raise, I got my hand up first. I'm a person of dull faculties. I'm the slowpoke. I'm the tortoise. And I'm not being humble. I mean, you might think I am, but you're wrong. I'm just trying to be honest, because that's kind of like what I try to do as much as I can. But there are ordinary people like myself who are not exceptionally gifted at all. Not for meditation. Just a slowpoke. But I'm really tenacious. You know, like that tortoise, it just never gives up. You know, going chug, 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 you know, that's me. And for the likes of me, having a path, the preliminaries, cultivating the mind, practicing shamatha, achieving shamatha, practicing vipassana, achieving vipassana, the union of shamatha and vipassana, priming yourself so that whether you're reading a text or contemplating the Dzogchen view or receiving point-out instructions from an accomplished master, you cut through, you cut through conditioned mind, you shatter it, and you drop into a timeless awareness that's beyond the 3 times of past, present, and future, unconditioned, unborn, unceasing. And then, with that preparation, shamatha, with its stability and clarity, gives you the muscle power to sustain that ongoing flow of awareness, of pristine awareness, the self-knowing pristine awareness, and your realization of emptiness prior to tekchut prevents you from falling to another pitfall, and that is back into reification, where you're reifying objects, subjects, your mind, awareness itself. It protects you. So the shamatha and vipassana are the 2 massive bodyguards to protect you when you break through to pristine awareness, to enable you to sustain that. And when you're resting in that practice, then all the great Dzogchen masters that I've read tell with one voice, once you're resting in Rigpa, now you have only one practice. Rest in Rigpa and deactivate your body, speech, and mind of a sentient being. Deactivate that, because as soon as you activate it, you're operating from the platform, shucks, I'm just a sentient being, but I hope to become a Buddha one day. When you're resting in Rigpa, you're resting in Dharmakaya. So there's nothing to achieve. But just let the blessings of Dharmakaya flow up and embrace you. And so there's nothing to be done, and that is the gist of Buddhahood without meditation. Meditation here means you're doing something to achieve that which you have not yet achieved. When you're resting in Rigpa, there is nothing to achieve, because you've tapped into a primordial ground that was already there as the ground, the path, and fruition. It's timeless. It's simultaneously ground, path, and fruition. And you're already home. So just stay there until it fully manifests and all the qualities of perfect enlightenment are yours.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Can you believe that was the appetizer?
You've stolen my thunder. Now what do I say?
So we're going to have a short break, and then Alan's going to give a Dharma talk. Thank you.
Welcome. Wallace. So we've laid some good groundwork. We're going into some specifics with respect to the practice of shamatha, the implications of the practice of shamatha. And what I'd like to do primarily during this 45 minutes is to focus on a few carefully selected methods, each of which is enormously important for its host tradition. So starting with mindfulness of breathing, of paramount significance in the whole Theravada tradition. In the Pali Canon, there is no method the Buddha taught more frequently than mindfulness of breathing, both as a shamatha and vipassana method. We'll move on to focusing on the mind itself as a shamatha method, which is very strongly emphasized, absolutely central to Mahamudra and Dzogchen. And then resting in the shamatha without a sign, shamatha without a target or an objective referent that you're looking at, and simply resting in the onflow of awareness as a shamatha practice. And that brings us very, very close to Dzogchen practice, which I will allude to a little bit. But context is of enormous significance here. In one meeting that I was with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, he said, shamatha is not dharma. He startled me. And he's perfectly right. And that is, if you decontextualize shamatha, methods for developing attention, you can use that to be a better gambler, a better chess player, a better teacher, a better sniper, a better swindler, an extortionist, and so forth. So the mere fact that you're developing exceptional levels of focus, of mindfulness, of introspective monitoring of the mind, there's no guarantee it's even virtuous, let alone that it's even taking one smidgen of a step on the path to liberation and enlightenment. In context, it's of enormous significance. Out of context, it may be ethically really negative. So every moment you're doing it, you're just burying yourself deeper and deeper into something that, a place you don't want to go. It could be ethically neutral, like practicing shamatha to be better at video games. I have nothing against them, but I don't think they have no weight, either as virtuous or non-virtuous, unless they're really nasty video games. Or they may be magnificently meaningful, profound, virtuous, making major strides towards the path to liberation and awakening. So I would like to be very brief here, but the context is so important, and it's easy to overlook it. I mean, we are in the modern world, and it's everywhere now. I travel internationally, teach all over the world nowadays. And the whole notion of East and West has vanished, it's evaporated for me. I don't even know where to draw the line. Is it just west of Singapore or east of Singapore? You know, I mean, Singapore is one of the most modern cities I've ever been in my life. You know, and Hong Kong, and the list goes on and on. We tend to be very utilitarian, many of us, very utilitarian when it comes to our meditative practices. Like, how much, somebody asked me in a radio interview not long ago, how little can I meditate and still get benefit? And I understand, I'm not laughing in sarcasm, and it's just a funny kind of statement, but the person is saying, look, it's an investment, and how little can I invest and still get the benefits? I don't think it's a stupid question, but it shows a very limited notion of what meditation is. So one word that didn't come up in the conversation earlier is a broader term broader than samadhi, broader than shamatha, and the term that is bhavana, which we translate as meditation. But in the Sanskrit, it means to cultivate. It means to cultivate. Cultivate your heart, cultivate your mind, your attention skills, cultivate virtues of patience, equanimity, forbearance, intelligence, wisdom, compassion, kindness, loving kindness, and so forth. All of this is cultivation. So nobody in his right mind would say, how little do I need to cultivate my mind and still get benefit? That would be like a farmer saying, how little water can I give and still get a crop? You know? It's not a sensible question, if you understand the import of bhavana. But where this really takes on tremendous depth and significance is if we bring it home to its own framework within the teachings of the Buddha himself, where after he walked from Bodh Gaya to Saranat, encountered his 5 earlier companions, he turned the wheel of Dharma for the first time, and the first reality that he directed the attention of his students to was the sheer reality of suffering. Now we could spend the next 45 minutes on that, but I would like to suggest we're largely missing the point here, especially when people are trying to secularize Buddhism, modern Buddhism, let's free it all of the mumbo-jumbo, the claptrap, and let's just get it really utilitarian. They actually miss the first noble truth, which means they never get the second, third, or fourth. And I'm just one point. We all know what suffering is. We know what it feels like to feel bad in the body and mind. Everybody knows that. Cockroaches know that. Alligators know that. Doesn't need any special insight. But the question that is really enormously of significance is, when is it over? And for the materialists, and I know many of them, many of whom I respect very highly as individuals, highly intelligent, educated, that's easy. The mind is what the brain does. When the brain shuts down, the mind's gone. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just gone. It stops. And I find that a very appealing notion. Because if I'm faced with two alternatives, either endless samsara, birth, aging, sickness, death, and just no end to it, or the quiet peace of oblivion, of sheer non-existence, I think I'm going to choose non-existence. Because I'm so sick and tired of samsara. And the notion of it going on indefinitely, I just find it overwhelming. It's not a happy thought. People from the outside looking at Buddhism, oh, you people can't handle the death, you want to be with your loved ones, therefore you believe in reincarnation. I'd have to say one word pretty much summarizes my view of that. It's hogwash. They're believing, the materialists believing, that somehow the brain conjures up consciousness, like a genie popping out of a lamp, to quote again a very famous materialist. If that happens, then when the brain stops, of course, there's no more genie. It just evaporates. So in other words, from the materialist perspective, you get the third noble truth for free. The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering and the causes of suffering. All you have to do is stop breathing. And then you're free. You're scot-free. There are no repercussions for you. Whatever you've done, you're now off the hook forever. And so there's no experience. What's the big deal? You've got to fall asleep and never wake up. I don't see what's to be afraid of there. If that's what happens, and something does happen at death, something happens, and I don't think it's a matter of choice, any more than the laws of physics are a matter of choice. It doesn't matter what you believe. There are laws of physics. That's the way it is. There is something the way it is at death. Either there is a continuity of your individual experience, continuity of consciousness, or there isn't. That's like pregnant, not pregnant. There's nothing in between. Not kind of maybe. It's either yes or no, continuity, no continuity, oblivion or not oblivion. If it's oblivion, I don't think you need shamatha. Really, I just don't think, why bother? It's not easy. And there are enormous challenges along the way you don't see coming. And you've got to have a lot of true grit to get through them. And if you think all you have to do is wait, and you have rest and peace forever coming your way, and all you have to do is stop breathing, frankly, I don't think you're ever going to develop sufficient motivation to go through the enormous challenges of actually achieving shamatha. Because it's so easy not to. Alcohol, nicotine, legal drugs, illegal drugs, entertainment, and work. That can keep you busy. And as you're getting older, just take more drugs. And then die. And you're finished. If that's the reality of suffering, I don't think we need Buddha Dharma. I really don't. I don't think we need it. There are plenty of good therapies out there that can help you deal with this problem and that problem. But, fasten your seatbelt. What if that's not true? Since the scientific community obviously does not know the nature of consciousness or what causes it. And that's just an evident truth. If you don't know what causes consciousness, you don't know what terminates consciousness. It's all belief. It's just opinion. So this is a terribly awesome thought, that there is no escape from reality. And you've got choices. You can continue, if you like, birth, aging, sickness, and death in multiple realms of existence, many of which are not that pleasant. That's easy. Just relax and hang out, and it will perpetuate. But the only alternative is find liberation or awakening. And that takes some real work. The magnitude of the reality of suffering, it's incomparable. If it's just limited to one life and you're finished, relax, for heaven's sakes. And by the way, if you just get fed up, you can always blow your brains out. Or just sleeping tablets. That's what I take. Just a big bottle of sleeping tablets. That sounds like a really smooth exit. Or maybe I'd follow Aldous Huxley and just take a massive overdose of LSD. Groovy and gone, But if there's no exit, then the reality of suffering, the first noble truth, is like, oh my, I was about to say, oh my God, but there's no God to appeal to. So just, oh, ay caramba, now we've got a problem on our hands, and that is this problem is not going to go away just by dying. Because you bring all your problems with you, your delusion, your craving, hostility, and all that truckload of karma you've been accumulating in this and previous lives. That's the baggage you carry with you. If that's what's happening, then nothing matters besides Dharma. I'm being really core here, but there's nothing matters. Everything dwindles, fades out into ultimate insignificance apart from Dharma. Now, Dharma can manifest as being a mother, a school teacher, an accountant. Dharma can manifest in all walks of life, in every meaningful livelihood, right livelihood. You don't have to be a monk or yogi, full-time, ascetic. But that's the starting place. If you don't grok, if you don't fathom the reality of suffering, you're not going to be inspired to check out the true sources of suffering because you'll be just worrying about all the catalysts that may or may not trigger suffering. The cessation, you already got that free, and the path is hang in there, it's coming anyway. But if the Buddha's insight was correct, and he said, I saw this with direct knowledge, there's no way to waffle out of that. A lot of so-called secular Buddhists like to waffle out of that. Because of their blind faith in materialism, frankly. I really don't respect the attitude, although I respect their yearning to find some practice they can engage with. But if reality of suffering doesn't end with death, if the causes are not found outside or in genetics or biology, but are found inside the mind, if cessation of suffering and its causes can only come about by knowing the very nature of the mind and its role in nature, the nature of reality itself, and the path laid out in ethics and samadhi and wisdom, then that just rises like a tsunami of significance. It's overwhelming. And frankly, there seems like nothing else to do. You may be married, you may have children. It's not, you have to be a monk or nun, but there's nothing more important to do than Dharma. Because it's the only thing that matters in the face of death. And everything you accomplish, everything you achieve and acquire, you lose it all. The guillotine comes down and you're cut off from everything you've ever acquired. And after a while, nobody will even remember you. That's samsara. So the only way out is to cultivate the heart and mind. And that's through the practice of Dharma. There are external Dharmas, the mundane Dharmas of seeking happiness by means of hedonic pleasures, acquisition, getting a good reputation, getting a lot of people to admire and praise you. Good luck with that. Or there's Buddha Dharma, which in Tibetan is called Nangbe Che. It's the Dharma of the insiders. That's what they call it. They don't call them the Buddhists. Tibetans call it, I'm an insider. And what does that mean? It's not an elitist, like, oh, you people are outsiders. It's that I'm seeking well-being. I'm seeking the causes of suffering and the eradication of suffering from its root inside. That's my priority. That's my orientation. I'm looking inside for the true sources of happiness and true sources of suffering. I know where to look, and that makes me an insider. And my Dharma is oriented around that. The external is important. Nobody wants to be in ill health or impoverished or enslaved and so forth. But the core is, because I've known people, some of my own teachers have spent decades in concentration camp and practiced Dharma through it. The most horrific of circumstances. Yangtan Rinpoche, Garchen Rinpoche. These people have been there. They've been in hell realms on planet Earth and practiced Dharma through it. And I've known people who are on the other end, living in like human facsimiles of Deva realms, and they're miserable. So that just points to one truth. The true causes are within. So it brings us to Shamatha, and that is if one is interested not only in being virtuous, which is good, avoiding non-virtue, practice virtue, good, but you're also interested in practicing Dharma, which means you are sowing the seeds to realize ever increasingly an enduring, genuine sense of well-being. That's what Dharma is about, authentic Dharma. But not only are you practicing Dharma, but you're intent on seeking, reaching, and proceeding along a path. From the very first teachings I received, back in 1970, 71, the theme of path loomed very large. The first systematic teachings I received was in 1971 with a wonderful Gelugpa Geshe. He taught us Lam Rim, the stages of the path. And the whole notion of path is something of irreversible transformation in a mode that is utterly benign, compassionate, wise, sane, ethical. I just looked at that and said, count me in. Count me in. To reach the path is the very meaning of human existence. To proceed along the path is the only thing to do once you've reached the path. Shamatha is necessary but not sufficient. And so, in all of this, mind is central. When we speak of suffering, we're primarily referring to mental suffering, not physical. Have a physical problem, go to a physician. Probably don't go to a lama, certainly don't come to me. I can't help you. But between the two, we actually care about mental suffering more than we care about physical. We care about both. But if there's going to be a choice, we'd rather be physically in a mess and mentally filled with joy rather than the opposite. And so it brings us within to fathom. When the Buddha said, here's the reality of suffering, he said, know it. Here's the reality of suffering. Know it. How do you know it? You know it by looking inwards, not by looking at the brain, not by looking at behavior or computer algorithms, but actually observing your own mind. If you'd like to find then what's really at the root of my discontent, feeling at ill at ease, dissatisfied, unfulfilled, I call it genuine unhappiness. That you're looking around, who done it? Why am I feeling so dissatisfied? And you want to point somewhere and you just can't find a target. Because in your environment, it may be actually pretty fine. That's what I felt when I was 20. In my environment, my family, my girlfriend, my car, my success at university, it was all fine. And yet it was just hopeless. I just knew there's no way I'm going to find the happiness I seek if I continue on this track. So when I was 20, I said, I'm finished. And I couldn't find what I was looking for in Western civilization. I'm finished. I'm done, as they say. And I left to go into a culture that I knew very little about, but I just knew it wasn't mine. And it had certainly allures, Tibetan culture. So one-way ticket. Giving up everything to go there. One-way ticket. And I discovered the theme of path. I was revealed the very notion of path, how to reach the path. And so this brings us to Shamatha. To know the reality of suffering, you must know the nature of mind. To know the reality of the source of suffering, you must know the nature of mind. To achieve liberation, you must know what liberates the mind. To follow that path, it's fundamentally about mind and the expressions of mind. And so the natural sciences have been magnificently successful for the last 400 years of unveiling so many aspects of the objective, the physical, quantifiable world. It's a celebration of an exponential growth of knowledge, primarily since Galileo, driven by the close inspection, investigation, exploration, and when possible, experimentation with the phenomena you're seeking to understand. It's the hallmark of the natural sciences. Mathematics plays a very important role, but it's secondary. Darwin wasn't a mathematician, but he did cause the second revolution in the sciences, right? And so, when it comes to the mind, we should approach it, as William James suggested, who taught here at Harvard for decades. First, foremost, and always, if you're seeking to understand the nature of the mind, you should observe it. The only mind you can observe is your own, and the means for doing so is introspecting, specting intro, and observing the array of phenomena. But for that, like mounting a telescope firmly with well-focused, well-polished lenses, stability and clarity, if you're going to be observing, investigating, probing into, and exploring the very nature of your mind and how it operates, what are the internal causes of well-being and of suffering, you need to have steady attention. Just like you can't have a wobbly telescope that's wobble, 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 and you get it, and then you're off someplace else, it's gyrating all over the place. You never discover anything. You need to be able to focus with continuity. And that's true pretty much in every branch of science. You don't get snapshots, you don't get glimpses, you don't flirt with reality. You immerse yourself. You immerse yourself. The Hubble telescope is used for a 1 million second exposure of a very dark region of space that seemed to be kind of empty. 1 million seconds compounded over 400 orbits around the planet. And they discovered 10,000 galaxies in this little dark spot. That's sustained focus. That's Shamatha of the Hubble telescope, right? 10,000 galaxies. A galaxy has between 100 billion and 1 trillion stars. That was in this dark spot where there seemed to be almost nothing. It's continuity, it's sustained. So what happens then when you develop a Hubble telescope for the mind and you observe it with tremendous sophistication, high acuity, high definition, clarity, vividness, and you do so with continuity? Discoveries are waiting to be made. Meditation without shamatha is astronomy with no telescope. It's molecular biology with no microscope. You can do it, but not well. And you'll never bring the practice to its culmination. So, it brings us then to shamatha, for which we've now already laid the groundwork in terms of what the word itself means. and the importance of refining attention so that you can apply your attention to investigating all manner of phenomena, but with a primary emphasis on mind. Because it's the center of where you are. Your nucleus is where your mind is, right? And so we need to develop attention skills, which is what Shamatha is about, and then we need to develop faculties that will support that type of endeavor. And in the classic Buddhist literature, Pali Canon, Mahayana, Vajrayana, they come to two faculties that we already have, which are to be refined and utilized to extents beyond anything imagined in the last 400 years of modern science. It's just not the questions we've been asking, and therefore we are still in the dark ages, frankly. Even William James, one of my great heroes, thought attention couldn't be trained. He thought if it could be trained, it would be fantastic. And he elaborated on that. I have some juicy quotes here, which I'm not going to read right now. He recognized the significance of it for education, creativity, ethics, character building, and so forth. How enormously significant. If you can develop sustained voluntary attention, he laid it out with brilliance and then said, but I don't think it's possible. And that was where modern psychology rested for 100 years. For all the studies of attention, a lot of them are brilliant. The question that was not asked was, can you train it? How do you do it? What are the measures of having done it? And what are the implications for the rest of your life? Those, to my mind, are the most important questions, and they were skipped until pretty much this century, and they've only begun. They're scratching the surface. Right? So this is not a criticism of the Western tradition, which has so many strengths Buddhism does not have. But what is often overlooked in the scientific studies of meditation is, are the meditators themselves making any discoveries that you're not getting using the methodologies of modern science, neuroscience, psychology? Is this a true collaboration, or are the meditators basically guinea pigs you're inviting into your lab, having them jump through hoops, and then the scientists are writing their reports on what they observed? If that's your notion of understanding meditation, I say try that with a mathematician. Bring in a group of mathematicians and say, we're trying to understand mathematics now. We will study your brain. We'll study your behavior. We're going to give you some cognitive exams and give you interviews, and then we will understand what mathematics is really about. It's preposterous, and it's no less preposterous for meditation than it is for mathematics or art. You want to study art by studying the brain waves of an artist? Really? And so forth. So shamatha is your basic tool. And it's not all or nothing. It's not, have you achieved shamatha, the access to the first jhana, or are you just, walling around on the shallow end? There's all kinds of stages in between. But the two faculties to be cultivated are very simply put. I'll use the Sanskrit homogeneously because my training is primarily in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. Smriti and Sampajanya. Smriti as in mindfulness, as in sati, but it's a Buddhist definition, not the modern one, which has only a faint resemblance to the Buddhist notion. They made it up, which is fine, but it's not the Buddhist definition, never has been, and it isn't now either. You can't just appropriate Buddhism because you want to and it's good for marketing. Sorry, but I'm being blunt. Somebody's got to be blunt. I'll be it. Mindfulness in the Buddhist tradition means to bear in mind. To bear in mind, whether you're bearing in mind the fluctuations of the breath, the in and out breath from moment to moment, bearing in mind where you left your keys, bearing in mind what you need to do tonight at 10 o'clock. It's retrospective, present-centered, and prospective. Mindfulness is bearing in mind without distraction and without forgetfulness. That's mindfulness. It's ability we already have, a faculty, but it can be refined to levels really unimagined in modern psychology. But there's not only the ongoing continuity of focused, deliberate attention on what we are attending to, whatever that may be, but there's also the monitoring. That is, we monitor the flow of mindfulness to see whether it's deviating either into laxity or excitation, because, our minds are pretty rambunctious, and so it's very easy to go off into tailspin of rumination, mind wandering, or to space out, lose clarity, lose any flow of cognizance, and sit there with a blank mind and thinking I'm practicing bare attention. Yeah, bare attention of a sleepy marmot. So it's bare attention, but what's the big deal? I mean, it's kind of like nothing. It's not shamatha, not vipassana, it's not anything else. It's called just sitting there with a blank mind, noting what's coming up. Whatever, dude, It's not Buddhist, it's not shamatha or vipassana. Mindfulness, this introspection, sampajanya, my translation is introspection, because it is in fact expecting intro. But not in the narrow bandwidth of Descartes, who was brilliant. It's not only a specting intro, a monitoring of one's mind, which is of paramount importance, but also right now you may notice that my hands are moving, my legs are crossed. I'm speaking in a certain tone of voice, I'm saying certain sentences. So it's my job, especially speaking in public, but at all times, monitor my body. Is what I'm doing with my body, is it appropriate, suitable, wholesome, unwholesome? That's my job. And that's specting intro. It's monitoring one's own physical posture and behavior. But I'm also speaking right now. I have to be watching my speech. Don't be sarcastic, don't be contemptuous, don't be disdainful, don't be arrogant. And there's a lot of things not to do. That even if what you're saying is true, it's improper speech. It's unwholesome speech because the way you're saying it and the motivation with which you're saying it. This is something I have to really watch when I'm attending to the political scene nowadays. It's very, very easy to observe the unwholesome activity of other people and take a holier-than-thou attitude and then speak with contempt. The Buddha, in his great discourse on metta, said, let no one ever hold anyone else in contempt, no matter what they do. There's contemptible behavior, there are contemptible attitudes, contemptible way of speaking, but they come and go. And the people who engage them are sentient beings, they're our brothers and sisters. And people don't deserve contempt. So I'm talking to myself primarily here. I'm not talking as one who's totally accomplished, and I'll speak to you mere plebeians. Not the case, not the case. But so there is the monitoring of one's own body, but not other people's body. That's not introspection, that's mindfulness of other people's body. It's introspective awareness of one's own body, one's own speech, and then we come to sitting in meditation, and primarily your attention is focused on your own mind. You'll notice once in a while your posture, though. See, you're not slumping, you're not drooping over, and so forth. You'll note your respiration on occasion, see it's flowing naturally and effortlessly. But above all, now especially in the practice of shamatha, you're really developing mindfulness so you're able to attend to your object of meditation and bear it in mind without distraction, without forgetfulness, free of excitation, free of laxity. And the introspection monitors that so that when you do deviate, you fall off the middle way of continuity and clarity, you note it quickly and you rebalance. Like a sailor trimming the sails of his sailing craft in fluctuating winds, right? So you don't just say, I think they're fine, and then go to sleep for an hour. You keep on looking, and then you trim here, you trim there, and then you're the optimal sailor. And so shamatha then is our technology that can be useful for all manner of activities, including video games, if that's what you like, but any type of meaningful activity, the arts, science, mathematics, and so forth, you can apply it to all of them. But principally, of foremost importance in the Buddhist tradition, is getting to the heart of the matter. The reality of suffering, its source, the possibility of freedom, and the path to that freedom. That's the primary use of shamatha. And it is the technology that enables you to probe into, especially the nature of the mind, and do so that you can make reliable observations that can be replicated by others who have suitable training, such that you can intersubjectively validate or challenge each other's discoveries. In other words, it becomes a science. Mathematics is very internal, but there's an enormous amount of consensual knowledge of among mathematicians, of proofs and all kinds of things, and yet mathematics is entirely internal. A monkey or a computer can scribble things on the board without any understanding at all. So as in mathematics, which is intersubjectively validated or challenged, when the person who first sought to solve Fermat's last theorem, he wrote a 100-page proof, which he thought was done, and his fellow mathematicians found a flaw about midway through and said, and they all recognized it, and he recognized it, back to the drawing boards, cleaned it up, solved Fermat's last theorem, and won the Ayers Prize. But it was intersubjective. But only an extremely highly trained mathematician could even be suitable for evaluating a 100-page proof of pure mathematics. The great meditators recognize great meditators. That's a fact. There are frauds, there are people who think they're higher than they are, there are phony balonies, there are people who are modest, there are people who are extremely humble, claim nothing, but have tremendous realization. But I've known a number of great meditators, and they know each other. As great mathematicians know each other. They know who are the creme de la creme. This is intersubjective. It's not just internally mystical and ineffable. The great meditators recognize each other in very intuitive ways. And shamatha is a key to this. And so we have these two faculties to be refined and cultivated. Okay? Your left hand, your right hand. But then there are qualities of awareness to be cultivated, and what I'm about to tell you, if you've not heard it before, can save you a lot of time. And I love a brief question. I was with His Holiness in 1979 when he won the Nobel Prize. It was announced, and he was interviewed by a journalist. And I think it was just the journalist really wanted to ask because he had nothing to do with the Nobel Prize particularly. He said, Your Holiness, do you need to have a guru to achieve enlightenment? And His Holiness paused and then said, no, but it can save you a lot of time. And so I'm not here to try to be anybody's guru. I'm just here to try to share Dharma as well as I can. But what I'm about to share with you can save you a lot of time. And that is when we say, okay, concentrate. Let's practice shamatha. That's about stability and clarity. Let's hunker down now. Let's get to work. Roll up the sleeves, and let's start practicing shamatha. Almost certainly, because this is what I did, is you say, okay, bear down, concentrate, focus, achieve progress. How much progress am I making? How long is this going to take? In other words, the first movement is contraction. And frankly, to be very candid, ego. I want to achieve. I want to progress. How long is it going to take? And it's contraction. And then the first retreat I did, not 37 years ago, was basically contraction. And lo and behold, surprise of surprises, it just winds up exhausting you. Just exhausting you, drains you. And jet fighter pilots know this, professional chess players know this, musicians know this, air traffic controllers know this. Just concentrate and stay concentrated for a sustained period, and you will be drained. You'll be exhausted, you'll be stressed out. You can actually get burnt out. And that's whether you're meditating or watching airplanes fly and hoping they won't crash. And so the first point is relaxation. Often overlooked, but to our peril. And it's not just, am I relaxed? Achieve a state of ease, of looseness, of relaxation, and then deepen it. All the way along your trajectory of shamatha. It's not just getting relaxed and being relaxed, it's getting relaxed and being more relaxed and continuing on a gradient of deeper, deeper, deeper relaxation. And that's your foundation for developing greater and greater stability, which is continuity, unwavering continuity of attention. Undeviating, flawless stability on the basis of relaxation and on the basis of that clarity, acuity, high resolution, high def. Those three in that sequence is a winning combination. Because stability on the basis of ease and relaxation is sustainable. Vividness, clarity, high acuity is sustainable on the basis of stability. But if you don't have stability, the clarity is going to make you hyper, fragile, emotionally unstable. And that happens sometimes in mindfulness meditation. Very little shamatha, but intense focus on moment to moment, whatever's coming up, being vividly, intensely aware of whatever's coming up in the moment. And if you're doing that in a cloistered environment where everybody's really sweet and friendly around you, no problem. And then go from there to downtown Boston and see how that flies. And you may just find it overwhelming and unbearable. And then just saving up your pennies for the next meditation retreat because you can't bear being in this world. That's not a sign of spiritual maturity. It's a sign of a very imbalanced cultivation of the mind, which I wouldn't wish on anybody, because it makes you more vulnerable to suffering than you were before. And so that sequence, relaxation, stability, and then clarity, there's a sequence there. Don't get it out of order. But then once you've cultivated them, and you're deepening all three simultaneously, then that's where some very unexpected and happy surprises come in. Because as the mind does calm, it becomes more stable, less perturbed, that's actually very relaxing. And so as relaxation forms the basis for stability, stability then in turn returns the favor and deepens a sense of ease. Stability is the foundation for developing very intense, acute, high definition, vivid attention. Now we've all experienced that on occasion, when there's cases of extreme arousal, but usually with no stability. But I can say this from experience. Whenever my attention is really at a high pitch, intense, it's very easy to stay focused because whatever I'm attending to is really interesting. And when my attention is low frequency, dull. I can be watching something that other people would find absolutely exciting, like a thrilling movie or, some extreme sport or whatever. And if your attention is low grade, it'll be boring. Sex can be boring. Many people have discovered that. And it's not always, but it can be totally boring. And not because necessarily the partner or the act, but just quality of awareness bringing to it. Like this again. Oh, it's Tuesday. It must be sex. And so, sex can be pretty high arousal, but not necessarily. And other thrill-seeking, some people, probably when they've jumped out of a plane 1,000 times, they probably find that boring too. Other people would find it, woo! And they go, woo. And so that sequence that when you get into the flow of it, these three are synergistic. So, moving on. Methods. Mindfulness breathing is classic. It's classic for a very good reason, because it has been found beneficial by so many people all across Asia for 2,500 years and now worldwide. And there's something quite extraordinary about the method, and I can't elaborate now because time is short. But in that mode of breathing and allowing the breath to flow in and out egolessly, effortlessly, and allowing the body to establish its own rhythm as you're passively but very attentively focusing on the rhythm of the breath. What has been found to be the case by the Buddha himself and innumerable times since then is this turns out to have a marvelously balancing effect on your whole body-mind system. You're allowing your body to heal in terms of nervous system, we say in the modern terminology, or your prana system. The whole system balances out. It is tremendously healing and balancing. You're attending to sensations of the breath, whether at the nostrils, the abdomen, or throughout the body, which are not by nature pleasant or unpleasant. They're really quite neutral. But as the Buddha himself discovered and spoke about with such tremendous clarity, a sense of peace arises, of serenity, that would be to be expected. A sense of well-being, sukha, arises. And it's not stimulus-driven, because you're not attending to something pleasant. A sense of bliss, priti in Sanskrit, a sense of joy or bliss arises, but you're not attending to something blissful. It's still sensations of the breath. The mind achieves what the Buddha called an ambrosial dwelling, as you're attending something so prosaic and neutral as the sensations of your breath. And moreover, the psychological immune system, your robustness to ward off the toxins and afflictions of the mind, is tremendously enhanced. So in an instant, when an unwholesome or negative tendency or impulse arises in the mind, it arises, finds no footing in your mind, and it dissipates of its own accord. That's the Buddha's own report. If it's one man, then we should worship him. But it's when one man and then followed by 100,000 over 2,500 years, you've got an enormous database that looked like all of science looked like it's the new kid on the block. It's only 400 years. It's still infancy. And so that's mindfulness of breathing in a nutshell. I've practiced it. It was the first Buddhist meditation I ever practiced, and it's been a love affair that's continued to the present day. I do it every day. I love it. It's just so deep, so wonderful practice. And you bring it with, as long as you're breathing, you can practice it. But then we move into this Mahamudra Dzogchen territory, where the primary emphasis of these two Indo-Tibetan traditions is fathoming the nature of the mind, the nature of pristine awareness itself, fathoming Buddha nature, going right into the ultimate ground state of your own mind. Buddha nature, that's what it's all about. And it's identified as being equivalent to Dharmakaya, the mind of the Buddha. And so they have chosen, and they've been doing this for more than 1,000 years, chosen a shamatha method that is especially designed to lead you right into the vipassana and the actual practice of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, or the Great Perfection. And this method, very widely taught, and I was first taught it 40 years ago by a Gelugpa master, Geshe Rabten, and that is your object of meditation is the mind. It's out of 6 domains of experience, you're selectively focusing only one. So it's not bare attention or open presence or choiceless awareness, it's none of those. It is focusing selectively on one domain of experience that is purely mental. It's the one that's left over when you're dreaming. You may have vivid dreams, but all of your attention is focused in the mental domain, not the physical, the auditory, the visual, and so forth. And so you're single-pointedly focusing on the domain of the mind, and whatever thoughts, images, memories, fantasies, desires, emotions, whatever comes up in that domain. But this is finesse. This is a brilliant but very simple method. And the key to it is that you're observing the mind from the perspective of awareness. And this is my little mudra. A single index finger point is symbolizing an unflickering candle flame. You're resting in the utter simplicity of awareness, resting in its own place, unmoved by the many movements of the mind. Thoughts, emotions, desires, memories, and so forth. They come and go, come and go, come and go. But in the midst of all the movements of the mind, you sustain the stillness of your awareness. You generate a type of internal objectivity that you're observing the mind without being cognitively fused with the activities of the mind. You observe emotions arise without being caught in the grip of the emotion. You observe desires arising without your attention being riveted to the object of the desires. You observe thoughts arising without thinking them and without attending to the reference of the thoughts. It's a very good thing to do. If you'd like to follow the maxim, one of the most ancient maxims in any Western language, know thyself, this would be a giant stride in that direction. To know your own mind through thick and thin, and to observe it discerningly, but without judgment, without reactivity. So if terrible things are coming up, you watch them as an unbiased, innocent bystander, without being implicated, caught up, and carried away by them. What happens if you do this 10, 20,000 hours, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, full time? I can tell you, because it's been done so many times. So I'm reporting on generations of yogis before me. And that is you're watching your mind dissolve. All the activities of the mind dissolving away like a snow globe and finding all the little flecks of snow coming to rest. Your mind dissolves. Your mind vanishes before your very eyes as you observe it from the vantage point of awareness, and you see it dissolve into a sheer vacuity, which is called the substrate. And your mind, your subjective mind, dissolves into substrate consciousness. And what is the substrate consciousness conscious of? The substrate. And the substrate, just the domain, that empty space of your mind, which has now been evacuated of all contents, but your awareness is so focused that you're picking up no sensory input. It's no signal from 5 domains. And you're resting there, attending to a sheer vacuity. You've almost achieved shamatha. And then you do the final trick. You invert your awareness right in upon itself. It's called self-illuminating mindfulness. So instead of simply gazing like a deer gazing into headlights, into a sheer vacuity, you invert your awareness right in upon itself. And you find that the very nature of your awareness in this primal flow is blissful, luminous, and non-conceptual. Those are the basic characteristics of your mind when it's unencumbered by all the activities of the coarse mind. You can take a shortcut if you like, a more direct route. It's not necessarily faster, but it is more direct. And that is cut out the middleman. And that is, instead of attending to the mind, the thoughts, the emotions, the personal history, the narrative, the neuroses, and all of that, saying, you know, and frankly, I'm there already because I've done this for so long. I kind of watch my mind. I think I've been there and done that. There aren't really many surprises in Alan Wallace's mind. I wouldn't invite you in because you'd find it boring pretty quickly too. And it's only here for a little while, maybe minutes, maybe a few decades, but it's a short story. How about just cutting that out and just resting with no object at all? Resting in awareness of awareness of awareness, being aware, being aware, being aware, and not attending to anything else. And making that your practice. Shamatha without a reference, without anything outside of itself. And making a beeline. It's almost like a black hole that dissolves your mind right into it. And all the light contained inside the black hole. And you go right to the substrate consciousness directly. You've achieved what the great Drujum Lingpa called the essential nature of the mind, what the great Gelugpa master of Panchen Losang Chukyi Gyaltsen called the relative nature of the mind. You have fathomed the nature of consciousness. It's stem consciousness. It is not a consciousness that arises independent upon the brain. Its continuum arises before your brain came into formation, and it will continue after your brain is turning into fertilizer. It's not brain contingent. That's an observational fact. It's not a fantasy, it's not a religious belief, not for those who've done the hard work. But this is the dimension of consciousness that carries on from lifetime to lifetime. And your mind does not emerge from the brain, but it's conditioned by the brain, of course, damage the brain sufficiently, and your mind will not work very well, or it won't work at all. But it doesn't go poof, and it doesn't dissolve back into neurons because it didn't come out of neurons. It goes back into the stem consciousness. And that's what carries on from lifetime to lifetime. When you're resting there, as we wrap up now, when you're resting there, you are experiencing your own consciousness nakedly, without mediation, without the filtration of a human mind, concepts, biases, prejudices, noise, and all of that. You're resting in a flow of just pure primal consciousness. But it's conditioned, and it is so-called, in a manner of speaking, the repository of all your memories and all your karmic imprints. This is what you bring with you when you depart from this life. Not your mind, because that just goes, dissolves back into the substrate. You'll never have this human mind again. But the substrate consciousness, that's a keeper. That will carry you to enlightenment or just to indefinite samsara. You're resting there. Resting there, you are now perfectly poised to probe into the very nature of existence, of this primal flow of consciousness, to see whether this exists in and of itself, as a Ding an sich, a thing in itself, existing by its own inherent nature, or not. Is this too something that exists, has only a nominal existence, as something separate from everything else? You are perfectly poised to practice vipassana on the very nature of the mind, but it's this mind, stripped naked, stem mind. Realize the emptiness of that, and you have made a major stride along the path. Realize the empty nature of your own flow of awareness, and you're now ready for the Dzogchen view. To receive pointing out instructions to cut through. Texture means to shatter, to cut through the reification of my mind, even on a conventional level, to cut through the conditioned mind to its underlying, truly transcendent ground that is beyond time, beyond place, beyond any conceptual construct, can be known but only by itself. And that's when you cut through even the substrate consciousness to Rikpa, pristine awareness. And you've now become a bona fide Dzogchen practitioner. That's a brief introduction to Shamatha. So, is Daniel here? I think it's time for discussion. Yo, are we ready to go?
Great, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have time for a few questions. And we'll be taking them from the live stream audience, from you folks, and from some of the students in Alan's online course with Wisdom. And we have 2 microphones, I should say. This is one of them. We'll be passing them around.
Is this working? Can people hear me?
Sounds like it.
Okay, cool. Maybe we'll take a question from the live audience present. So we'll start with that, yeah?
Subdue them into submission.
So I think if you raise your hand, we're going to run around with the mics. And this mic comes through the live feed, right? Yeah, cool.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
I wanted to ask you to perhaps talk a little bit about the heart. Talk about the mind,
Yeah.
and the brain,
Yeah.
but the heart, anahata. The electromagnetic field of the heart is over 100 times stronger than the electromagnetic field of the brain.
Right. There's a lot of neurons down there too.
Yeah, so I'm interested in that in addition to your thoughts on intuition. Because you talk about
Happy to.
mind and
Happy
consciousness.
to, sure. You know, this is the problem of speaking in a language that's not a Buddhist language, or that has not been cultivated into a Buddhist language over centuries. Like Tibetan. It's a very Buddhist language at the point, because it's absorbed and developed a vast vocabulary that was specifically for Buddhism. And so when we say mind, it doesn't have a one-to-one correspondence with the Sanskrit chitta or Tibetan sem. Bodhicitta is bodhi mind, except it's not mind, as in mind versus heart. That distinction that goes back to Aristotle, the intellect and the emotions, often a lot of gender bias to it. The men are the intellect, reason, the women are emotions, all that kind of jazz. And that the man should be on top, reason over emotions. That whole division you just don't find in Buddhism. It's just not there. So when we speak of so every time I said mind, think heart-mind. Because it's absolutely embracing both. The 4 immeasurables are the cultivation of the mind, well, the heart-mind, because it's all from the heart. It's loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and even-hearted caring for the well-being of others. That's equanimity. And so bodhicitta, it's called mind, but it's heart-mind. So everything I said, the one word I love here in English, because there are already some juicy words in English, is attention. And it goes back to the Latin to tend to. Now, right now, I'm offering you my attention, right? Which means, now what does that mean? I'm tending to you. That's clear, isn't it? But tending to you means watching over, caring for, and looking after. That's built into the English term attention. But that has a lot of heart, doesn't it? Like a flight attendant is tending to, watching over, looking after, and caring for all the passengers in the airplane. That's not a head trip. But must they be cognizant, alert, attentive, intelligent, recognizing when there's turbulence, recognizing when maybe a passenger is starting to freak out, and and so forth? Yeah, sure, they have to be very attentive, intelligently, but with the heart attending as well as what we call the mind. So just never think of them as being separate in Buddhism, and then the problem doesn't even arise of how do we bring them together, because the separation of heart and mind in the first place is artificial, and I think anti-useful. As generalizations about women being more emotional than men, I just don't buy it. It's hogwash, and it's been a source of so much suffering, that kind of gender bias, and we haven't even extricated ourselves from it now, as you well know. Women still don't have a fair shake in pretty much almost every walk of life. So that comes from this heart-mind business. We should dispense with it and just stop. With intuition, this is an interesting one. The term prajna, which we often translate as wisdom, in just flat-out Buddhist psychology, when you're speaking of mental factors, it means intelligence. It's flat-out intelligence, a very good translation. Cultivate intelligence as a mental factor as you cultivate attention and memory and concentration and so forth, and it turns into wisdom and the perfection of wisdom, prajna paramita, right? But that's not intuition. That's intelligence writ large, when it's the perfection of wisdom, realizing the true truth and the indivisibility of ultimate and relative truth. That's intelligent large. But there's another term in Tibetan, yeshe, and I translate it very literally. Ye means primordial or timeless, beginningless, and she is knowing, a primordial knowing, a timeless knowing. And yeshe is not something you cultivate. So I translate it as primordial consciousness. Intelligence and wisdom you cultivate through hearing, through thinking, and meditation. You cultivate it as deeper, deeper, deeper dimensions as you cultivate attention. Cultivate wisdom, cultivate intelligence. But primordial consciousness is not something you cultivate, it's something you unveil. And primordial consciousness is not really an English term. I made it up to translate a Buddhist term, which has a long legacy behind it. But if we had to fish around in the English vocabulary, what ordinary term do we use that would have a strong resemblance to primordial knowing? It's intuition. It's intuition. It's where we know something that is not perceptual in the sense that I know the color of your sweater. I'm not intuiting that, and I'm also not figuring it out. I perceive it. Okay, we have perception. Just see it. There it is. Okay, got it. And then there are many inferences we make using logic. Inferring causes from effects, there's many, many inferences we make. All men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates must be mortal. Okay, got it. Logic. So there are two modes of knowing that are very well known and exhaustively studied in Buddhist epistemology: direct perception and inference. But we can easily overlook kind of the wisdom of the Mahasiddhas, the great adepts, because they're making a beeline to unveiling a mode of primordial knowing that is always there, hidden in plain sight, that is waiting to be unveiled. But like shafts of light breaking through the clouds, we have these shafts of intuition, of a knowing that's not merely a hunch or a guess or wishful thinking, a knowing that is not knowing by simply perceiving or by logically inferring. And especially the practice within Tibetan Buddhism, the practice of Dzogchen and Mahamudra, are really all about unveiling that mode of knowing that is timeless, primordial, and it's your deepest birthright. That's intuition. And it's the 10th perfection. The perfection of primordial consciousness is the perfection of intuition. That's in the 10 perfections in the Mahayana tradition. Okay?
So we
Yeah.
have a question from the online audience. So in the practice of shamatha, is there a way to monitor and evaluate your own progress accurately?
Yes, there is, but it's a two-edged sword. That is, you can really cut yourself very easily, and you can undermine your own practice by overdoing it. So I think I'll try to be concise here, because I'm sure there are a lot of very interesting questions here, but the practice of shamatha is really a mental workout. I mean, after all, it is. You're developing skills, and there you are. But if we take the analogy of going to a gymnasium, a fitness club, and you go in, you get a trainer, and you go in and say, you know, my biceps are really wobbly, and my stamina is really poor, and my body's quite rigid, and so forth. So go at it, trainer. I'm here. Let's have an hour training. And you go for the hour training. At the end of hour training, you say, you know, there's no more mass in my muscles, and I don't feel much different. I think you suck. Because I spent a whole hour with you. I paid good money, and I'm just not seeing any effect. So can you give me a better trainer, please? Because, you know, I paid my money. Where's my candy bar? You know? So if you're asking that after a day, it's just ridiculous. If you ask it after a week, it's probably ridiculous. But if you ask it after a month of regular training, and not just in the gym, but you're really trying to keep fit, good diet, and all of that, after a month, then you may retrospectively say, okay, for resilience, strength, and so forth, how is it a month later? You should find some differences. And so one has to be careful there. It's not the case, don't evaluate, no, be here now, don't be judgmental. No, if you're meditating, you should meditate for a reason, and you should see it's beneficial. It's not quit, right? But you need to know how much and when, and don't obsess about it. Don't try to evaluate it when you're practicing, because you'll just be trying to thread a frayed needle through the eye of a frayed thread through the eye of a needle. You're either doing this or that, but you're not getting anywhere. So be in consultation with a qualified teacher, check in now and then, but most importantly is when you're doing the practice, have utter confidence that you're practicing correctly. And one final tip on this point that I find very, very important, extremely helpful, because I'm a Californian, you know. We want to get stuff done. California or bust. Some of my ancestors were pioneers way back in the 19th century. You know, we want to be practical here. But there's a real key to this, and that is when you're practicing, why you're practicing. If while doing it, you already find it meaningful, then you don't have to wait. How's this going to turn out? Is this worthwhile? Am I progressing quickly, slowly? Compared to whom? If while you're doing it, you already know it's meaningful, then it's fine. Every moment that you're cultivating loving kindness is a moment well spent. Every moment you're probing into the nature of reality, practicing vipassana, every moment is well spent. Every moment you're attending mindfully, discerningly, relaxed, stable, and clear, and attending with continuity on whatever your chosen object is, with a sound motivation, perhaps even a benevolent motivation. Every moment, it's already meaningful, and you don't have to wait. And when you know that, it's not just a belief, then you can really find out what the sense of ease is all about. Because if you're meditating only because you hope that something will happen in the future, you don't know. So you're caught in hope and fear, and that is not restful. Find that it's meaningful while you're doing it. That's the path.
So maybe we'll take another question from the audience here. So Chris has got a question.
Up in front.
It's wonderful to see you again,
Good to see
and
you.
thank you for coming to us here. So I have 3 questions. Which one would you like?
First.
Okay.
I'll listen.
I knew you
Oh,
would say
no.
that. I'm wondering if you might address something that isn't really, you don't often find in the texts around the distinction between feelings and emotions.
Aha. Yeah.
And especially things like what we might call in psychology affective traits, or things that are deeper currents of things like shame,
Yeah.
unworthiness. How might we apply shamatha practice to that sense of reification of self in those terms, in terms of worthlessness, and not really believing that we are the fruits of our meditation, if you will.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as an old translator, because I've been translating text for more than 40 years now, there's a translational issue. Feeling by what definition? I've got a feeling, I have a tingling feeling in my foot. That's good English. In Buddhism, when we speak of Vedana, which is the object of the second of the four close applications of mindfulness, is one of the mental factors, it's primitive, it's raw, it's pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. That's it. And it's physical, it's mental, it's a pleasant sensory experience of something visual, and so on. But it's positive, negative, and neutral. It's really raw and primitive. And I translate that as feeling. How do you feel? Good, bad, indifferent. So primitive, raw, very simple. But it's that domain of our experience that we tremendously care about. Are you happy, sad, or neutral? In pain, feeling joyful, or pleasant, or neutral? We always care. So that's one definition. So I'll stick with that because I know what I'm talking about. Feeling is primitive, raw, it's physical, it's somatic, and it's psychological. It's relational or it's internal, because you can have feelings all by yourself on your lonesome. When it comes to emotions, for which I don't know of any term in Sanskrit or in Tibetan that is a direct correlate to that, or direct translation, where this is found is in this great big bundle of mental processes that you attend to closely in the third application of mindfulness, of the mind. But now we come back to your point. Mind is not just cognitive. It's not just memory and executive control and all of that. It's emotions, all of them, from disgust and contempt to empathy to delight to boredom and so forth. But this is where we absolutely don't make the Aristotelian split. And that is in that domain of mind that we closely inspect, investigate, probe into in the Vipassana practice of understanding the mind. All the emotions are there, except pleasure and displeasure, happiness and sadness. They're emotions. We covered those. But now all the other nuances, and you speak English very well. How many emotions do we have marked, with such subtlety? And so they're all in the category of mind, but that's also where memory is, and fantasy, and dreams, and so forth and so on. And so a central theme here, especially in the shamatha practice where you're focusing on the mind, well, that includes emotions. It's not just thoughts. They'll often say observe thoughts, but I checked with a great master on this point just last year, or a year before last now, Yangtan Rinpoche, and I said, when they speak of observing thoughts, are you referring just to discursive thoughts like chit-chat, or are you referring to the whole gamut or array of mental processes, all the emotions and memories and fantasies and desires and so forth? And he said, no, it refers to all of them. Thought is just a cipher to include all of them. So what are you doing in that shamatha practice? Is you're resting in the utter simplicity of your awareness, which is still resting in its own nature, vividly, attentively, and discerningly attending to whatever comes up, but simply observing without the cognitive fusion. So this is a skill to be cultivated, and the value of it is beyond expression. And that is, imagine that one is chronically prone to low self-esteem. Why? Because you're, number one, focusing on the negative, probably in a biased fashion, and number two, you're identifying with it. This is like having warts and thinking, I'm a warty person. Well, no, those are bumps in your skin, for heaven's sakes. And the bumps are not you, your skin is not you, your body is not you. Why are you identifying with warts? That's not very intelligent. They're just warts. And some people are impatient, and some people have a lot of anxiety, and other people have a lot of anger, and some people are very lusty, and some people are very egotistical, and so forth. Yada, yada, yada. So what? Don't identify it with it, for heaven's sakes. Observe it arising, observing it passing. None of them are you. You don't have to own any of them. They're just arising and passing, and observe it from a perspective of awareness and see them arise and see them dissolve of their own accord. And there's no grounds for low self-esteem while resting in awareness. Nor is there any, because the opposite is just as bad, high self-esteem. I'm better than you are. That's no better than low. They're both exaggerated. They're both mental imbalances. So why not throw out hold them high and say, just here I am. Here's awareness. And attend to it. So attending to the processes of low self-esteem arising and passing and not identifying with them. And see them dissolve in and of themselves. And see there is no basis here for my constructing a sense of identity based upon that. There's no reason to do that. So Bob Newhart had a fantastic clip of the $5 therapy. You ever see it? You can find it on YouTube. Bob Newhart, $5 therapy, 5-minute therapy, $5. And whatever came up, he'd say, stop it! That was it. It's great. He says it much better than I. You have to see him live. But that was this whole therapy. Stop it. But stop it. And that was it. I really like that therapy. So if you're feeling so low self-esteem, stop it. It has no basis in reality. So observe the emotions and so forth, the rising and passing. And if you're really very, very sincere, then just watch your whole mind dissolve. Watch yourself lose your mind and rest in awareness. And it's liberated.
It's the thought that counts.
Yeah, it's awareness that counts. Thoughts come and go. Awareness is pretty constant.
So we've got a question from Michael, who's in the doing the course. So Michael asks, what is your view on cultivating shamatha through generation stage? And then there's a related question online, and Maria's asking, can you develop shamatha with Vajrayana sadhana generation stage in other than the dissolution stage? It seems to me that meditating on the details of the mandala is more like Kanika Samadhi.
It can be, but if that's what you're doing, then you'll never achieve shamatha. That is, in the midst of a sadhana. So the first answer is very simple. Can you freshly achieve shamatha by way of stage of generation practice in Anuttara Yoga Tantra? The answer is yes. There's no question about it. There's no debate, really. So people debate or are ignorant, and those who are not ignorant say, okay, well, of course you can. But now there's a nice analogy, and that is we have this magnificent array, and I'm not exaggerating, a magnificent array of methods from the Pali Canon, marvelously interpreted in the Theravada tradition, including mindfulness of breathing and some other spectacular methods. And they're Theravada, or they're Pali Canon. We have another whole bandwidth of shamatha methods within Sutrayana, within the Mahayana tradition. Observing the mind, you don't find that in the Pali Canon, but it's writ large in the Mahasa tradition of India and carried over into all four schools of Tibetan Buddhism. That's Mahayana. It's spectacular. And then awareness of awareness. The Buddha taught it. It was called the Vijnana Kasina, just awareness of awareness, consciousness of being conscious. It's there in the Pali Canon. It's sublime, not very commonly taught, but it is there. You find it in Mahamudra Dzogchen. And then we have the complexity, the elegant and incredibly sophisticated complexity of engaging in sadhana practice, in stage of generation practice, in highest yoga tantra. And many lamas strongly encourage people to do that. Well, for very good reason. But we have to also look at the fine print. And that is, achieving shamatha in stage of generation means you're practicing stage of generation, which means you received empowerment. You didn't just sit in on some empowerment and mumble after the Lama speaking very rapidly in Tibetan, and blah, 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 I think, blah, 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 and say it 3 times, blah, 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 and kind of do the visualization, but not really. And at the end, write in your journal, I got this empowerment today. Maybe. Your body was there. But did you receive empowerment? That's an open question. But this is Vajrayana practice. If your motivation is not bodhicitta, you're not doing Vajrayana practice. If you do not have some genuine insight into emptiness, you're playing dolls, you're playing cowboys and Indians, you're playing cops and robbers, you're going through a pantomime of pretending you're Tara while you know you're Sally. It's Sally putting on Tara clothes. Or it's a guy putting on, the erect penis and the many arms of Yamataka. I mean, it's pretty horny, but it's not Yamataka. One could say it's a lot of bull, but it's not Vajrayana. And so, this is holiness. I sound like I'm sarcastic, but I'm just telling what's true here. To practice Vajrayana, bodhicitta is not optional, it's imperative. Realization of emptiness is imperative. Guru Yoga is imperative. Having dissolved your ordinary sense of identity into emptiness, and out of emptiness arising with divine pride is imperative. Viewing your entire environment on the cushion and off the cushion with pure vision is imperative. And so what does this entail, achieving shamatha within stage of generation? This means you dissolve everything from the environment and yourself, your body, your mind, and your own identity, all into emptiness. Out of emptiness, Om Svabhava Shuddha Savadama Svabhava Shuddho Ham, you rise as the deity, you generate the environment, and you hold that in mind unwaveringly with divine pride, pure vision, bodhicitta motivation, and realization of emptiness. That is not easy. It is very powerful, but frankly, very few people are qualified to do it. And so to tell people who don't really have bodhicitta, have not realized emptiness, have crappy shamatha, don't have much in the way of guru yoga, And their notion of pure vision is basically just projecting some nice stuff on crappy stuff, is pseudo-Vajrayana. So it is a magnificent and very sophisticated, tremendously transformative and profound practice. But as the Tibetan aphorism states, there are many profound practices and very few profound practitioners. And so the analogy I like a lot, and it's a sweet analogy. You come to a locked door, and the door is to open the treasure trove of your own mind. Your substrate consciousness, your Buddha nature, the immense potential of your own mind, but it's a locked door. And you have 3 keys to open the door. And one is made of gold, the second one is silver, and the third one's of brass. Which one shall you use? Gold, silver, or brass? The one that opens the door. That's all that matters. And so if you think Vajrayana is so far superior over Sutrayana, and Mahayana is so far superior over Theravada, I'm going to take the gold key. Vajrayana, great, but it does open the door. You say, no, I'm a Chan practitioner, I'm a Mahayana Buddhist, I'm going to use that silver key, Bodhicitta, Bodhisattva, I'm going to use the silver key. That does open the door. And so what is important is, through the practice of shamatha, is your mind becoming serviceable? Is it becoming more relaxed, more composed, stable, and more clear? Are you proceeding on the path? And if you do so with a bodhicitta motivation, whether you're practicing mindfulness of breathing, observing the mind, awareness of awareness, or Vajrayana, it's a Mahayana practice. If you practice with a trivial, mundane motivation, it doesn't matter whether the technique is Mahayana or Vajrayana, it's a trivial practice because your motivation is trivial. And so, yes, shamatha can be achieved freshly in the state of regeneration. Very few people do so. And I know, because the first time I went into a retreat, I had the tremendous blessing to be under the direct guidance of His Holiness Dalai Lama. He taught me shamatha within state regeneration. That's what I did. And I know exactly when to do it. You do the whole sadhana, the generation of the environment, yourself as a deity, you do all of that. You recite mantras, whatever mantras are to be decided. You've done everything, including mantra recitation. You're pretty much ready to wrap up, right? While sustaining divine pride and pure vision, sustaining the visualization of yourself and your environment, then you hold that, the sense of divine pride and the pure vision and the visualization, and you achieve shamatha in that. Suffused with realization of emptiness, motivated by bodhicitta, and you achieve shamatha that way. But you do so while stopping all other activity. No mantra recitation, no movement, no activity. So this is not momentary samadhi, this is resting in the stillness of your awareness, maintaining the stillness of your visualization and the stillness of your own identity as the deity. And only in that way do you achieve shamatha. You will not achieve shamatha while your mind is in motion and while your awareness is moving with the mind. And so it's very elegant practice, but it's not easy, and it's not necessarily the fastest route. Mindfulness of breathing may be the fastest route, and if you get there, you get there. And if you don't, you don't.
So I'm not sure you're going to have an exact answer for the next question, but the question is, how many people have achieved shamatha in the world today?
Was it 37 or 38? There's no way of telling unless you're a Buddha. That's the answer. There's no way of telling. Just to take one example, there was a marvelous yogi of yogis, one of my teachers, that spent about 35 years in retreat, full-time, professional yogi, starting in Tibet. Lived on meditation pills in Tibet. He ate no coarse food. In other words, he was already very accomplished in Tibet. That was before 1959. Fled into exile, went directly into retreat in exile. And I got to know him in 1970s, and he let me meditate in his cabin when he moved to another one in 1980, when I went to retreat. So this was really a yogi's yogi, and he was tremendously revered by his peers, Lama Zopa Rinpoche and so many others. And on one occasion, I had the audacity to ask him, could you share any of your experiences over the last 30 years you've been in full-time practice? And he looked at me with this, I can't emulate it, it would look tawdry, but it was this radiant smile, just like joyful, like the sun breaking over the horizon, this joyful smile, his eyes glinting, and he said, I've had no realizations at all. And I've never seen anybody say that so blissfully. And this is the way of almost all the yogis. There was another one I saw just on YouTube, a man I never met, Chokye Techen Rinpoche. He's passed away now, one of the greatest of the great in the Sakya tradition. And you see this interview, you can find it on YouTube, it's easy to find. I've never met him, but some of my students were students of his. And the inexpressible humility that he embodied in every aspect of his being, I just felt such tremendous faith in him. As he said, I have no realization at all, but I have very deep faith. And I just wanted to stop prostrating. And so beware of those who are blowing their own horn, because they're very rarely the real McCoy. Once in a while, in Milarepa or the Buddha Shakyamuni or others, they feel it's time to just show my cards. So it's not that if a person speaks about his or her realization, they don't have any. But beware. The greatest ones that I've met, such as His Holiness, who says, I don't have bodhicitta, only the aspiration to achieve bodhicitta. From possibly, how would I know, the greatest bodhisattva on the planet. So I only aspire. So there's no telling. But for those who have achieved shamatha, they can know with a high degree of confidence, if they encounter other people who have achieved it, whether they have. I mean, how many great mathematicians are there? I mean, world-class mathematicians are in the world. If you're not a mathematician, you have no way of knowing. But if you speak with a great mathematician, then that person could tell you how many are there at the highest echelons. And that person could probably tell you. But I'm not one of those people. So I'll just say I don't know. What I can say is we need more. And that's really my passion. So I will pitch this, that I am very, very focused now on doing everything I possibly can as my years are dwindling, the hours of the hourglass, or the sands are flowing away, you know what I'm saying, to creating an environment, creating the most conducive circumstances we possibly can. We found land to create the environment that is as optimal as we can possibly approximate for people to come and go into open-ended retreat, have no financial worries at all, so need blind, go into retreat, have at least one guide, if not more, available, monitoring, helping, guiding, sustaining them as much as we can. Go into create a facility that what I call a contemplative nursery to create an environment for people to achieve shamatha. The more the merrier. But fully achieve it. Authentically, so any great teacher from the Theravada tradition, His Holiness Dalai Lama, other great yogis would check in and said, yeah, you did it. And there will be no question about it. Because there's a gold standard and they will have met that. I feel this is one of the most important things that can be done in the modern era. Shamatha by itself, small. The door it opens to is enormous.
So we're going to have to wrap up soon, but is there a final question from the people present here? Anyone have one last question?
Thanks for this enlightening talk. I mean, I just came for the first time. Some of the terminologies are very new for me. I just wanted to ask the premise on which you started the talk, the motivation for practicing samatha.
Yes.
It should not be entering into samsara. That's what you told.
Oftentimes meditation is practiced, I think, to make samsara more comfortable. To relieve stress is a good thing. It makes samsara more comfortable. Develop greater creativity is a good thing. Makes samsara more creative. Makes greater productivity, and so forth and so on. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not dharma. Because dharma is about gaining freedom and not simply gaining greater comfort in samsara.
So my question is, if that is not the goal, that we should not enter into samsara, so what should be the objective for practicing samatha? Is it like to achieve that state of nothingness or state of liberation, or how do you define it?
Yeah, I wouldn't strive diligently to achieve nothingness, because I think there's more to reality than that. I think there's more to reality than the mere cessation of samsara. There are some very fine Theravada scholars that believe that nirvana is actually achieving complete absolute extinction. They're called annihilationists. And they're not uninformed or unintelligent, but they have an interpretation of nirvana when an arhat dies, is that person is absolutely obliterated. What the materialists think you get for free, this interpretation of the Theravada says you get there only after an enormous amount of effort following the path. I don't believe that. That's one interpretation, But there are other very fine scholars like Bhikkhu Bodhi and others who do not believe that there's more to nirvana than simply oblivion. But the motivation, within the Eightfold Noble Path, one that's often overlooked in the mindfulness movement, so to speak, and in the Vipassana movement, so to speak, is authentic intention. It's often called right thought, but I don't think that's it at all. Right thought sounds like indoctrination. Like there's a Buddhist catechism out there. Did you sign on or not? Are you an insider or outsider? And I think it's absolutely not what the Buddha meant. Is get all your beliefs in a row. Agree with me, then you're fine. Then you have right thought. I don't believe that. I think it's a totally wrong connotation. But authentic intention, because it's Sampa in Tibetan. Its intention is your intention, your motivation, your impetus, your inspiration for engaging in the practice. Is it rooted in some insight into nature of reality? And that is, reality is that the very wellsprings of your well-being, your happiness, your joy and fulfillment are in your mind. They're not in the environment, never have been. And although all kinds of things from the environment can make us unhappy or give us pain, they're not the sources. The sources of suffering are inner, the sources of well-being are inner. Now that's authentic. There's a lot of scientific evidence behind this, and there is an innumerable amount of contemplative evidence behind this. And so if that's your motivation, that I would like to purify my mind so that I can experience less suffering, self-generated suffering, tap into the wellsprings of genuine well-being, and tap into the wellsprings of virtue. Virtue that we all agree is virtue, compassion, kindness, generosity. We can have a long list that are not just Buddhist virtues, they're virtues. And I would like to lead a more virtuous life. I'd like to lead a life of greater understanding and wisdom. I'd like to lead a life that brings with it greater and greater sense of well-being. Even without introducing the notion of liberation, nirvana, or some Buddhist concept, I say, well, that's authentic. If you're really looking to cultivate greater virtue, greater understanding and wisdom, cultivate from the inside out a greater sense of genuine well-being, that's authentic. If you look distant and say, but if then indeed death is not termination, that the seeds of suffering carry on, the mental afflictions carry on, then you might say, but I don't want them to carry on. What can I do now that it will at least be leading me in the direction of complete freedom? That I will no longer be a taint in the fabric of reality, but I'll be a blessing in the fabric of reality, as an arhat is. That's authentic on a deeper level. It's still about oneself as an individual, but every individual counts. So wishing for your own liberation is not a taint. As Shantideva says, if you don't consider the benefits of bodhicitta for yourself, why on earth would you cultivate it for the sake of others? As the Dalai Lama said, if you're going to be selfish, at least be intelligent about it. And I think that's very generous and true. Be selfish not in the sense of holding yourself superior or your own well-being is more important than others, because it's not true. That's not authentic. My well-being is not more important than yours or anybody else's. That's just true, right? So let's be true here. But my well-being is no less important than yours. And your importance is no less important than his. And that's just true, right? But then if that's true, then each individual is equally precious to every other individual. But then if I say, well, okay, I'm over here, and just among human beings on our planet, we have 7 billion over there, right? Not me's. Now which is more important? Collectively, 7 billion people, or this one here? That's easy. It's 1 to 7 billion. If that were a basketball game, one side really won. 7 billion to 1. And so when we consider that reality, then the well-being of others is basically infinitely more important than that of any one individual. Therefore, my motivation, if it's to be authentic, should be overwhelmingly counting the well-being of all those around me, human and non-human alike, on our planet and anywhere else there are sentient beings. For the sake of all beings without exception, I will now breathe mindfully in and breathe mindfully out. And that's authentic at the deepest possible level. And you're now practicing the Bodhisattva way.
So we're going to get some of the unanswered questions that are left over answered on the forum. So we'll do that. And then I just wanted to thank Alan. It's always illuminating. Thank you very much.
It's really a privilege being here at this magnificent university and with wonderful you. Thank you for being here.
And thank you to the Harvard faculty, Chris, to help make this possible.
Yeah, very generous. Great job. These are my questions. Thank you all.